You think quick meals are a modern invention? Think again. Old cookbooks held 10-minute recipes so clever and satisfying they put today's instant meals to shame. Let's dig into 100 forgotten 10-minute recipes you could only find in old cookbooks. Rice and raisin pudding on the stove was a 10-minute dessert that turned humble leftovers into something sweet, filling, and comforting when times were tough. You scooped leftover rice into a pot, poured in milk, added sugar, tossed in some raisins, and stirred it all together over low heat. That was it. In minutes, the mixture thickened into a creamy, sweet pudding that could stretch a small amount of rice into a treat for the whole family. It sounds simple now, but back then, every leftover counted, and recipes like this helped families avoid wasting a single grain. You would find rice and raisin pudding scribbled onto recipe cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It was a clever way to stretch ingredients, keep kids happy, and turn plain staples into something that felt like dessert. Most folks kept it basic, but sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or a dash of vanilla would show up if the pantry allowed. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, this quick stovetop dessert was a saving grace when groceries ran low and everyone needed a little sweetness. Rice and egg bowls with soy sauce were the thrift store cookbook lunch that turned leftovers into something hot, salty, and satisfying in minutes. You grabbed leftover rice, tossed it in a pan, cracked in an egg, scrambled everything together, and finished with a dash of soy sauce. It was quick, filling, and one of the smartest ways to stretch pantry basics into lunch. Old, thrifty meal guides loved this recipe because it used stuff already sitting in your fridge and came together in under 10 minutes. Some folks added chopped scallions or a little sesame oil, but the classic stayed simple: rice, egg, and soy sauce, fried up fast. It was a go-to for busy parents, college students, or anyone making do with leftovers and a tight grocery budget. The rice got crispy around the edges, the egg brought protein, and the soy sauce pulled it all together. It might not win awards for presentation, but it filled you up and tasted good when you needed a cheap, fast lunch. Pork chop sandwiches gave thin-cut chops a starring role in a dinner that felt hearty yet required little effort. Lightly seasoned pork chops hit a hot skillet and browned in minutes, their edges turning crisp while the meat stayed juicy inside. Soft sandwich buns toasted nearby, ready to cradle the sizzling chops as soon as they were done. Some families added pickles or a smear of mustard for tang, while others kept it simple, letting the rich flavor of the pork shine on its own. The entire meal came together before the evening news finished its first story, a perfect option for nights when work ran late. Each bite balanced the tender meat with the soft bread, creating a combination that was both rustic and satisfying. Affordable and fast, these sandwiches showed that even a modest cut of meat could deliver the comfort of a full supper without hours in the kitchen, keeping hunger at bay and spirits high. Poached eggs on buttered rice were the definition of doing more with less. Leftover rice from the night before? Perfect. Crack a fresh egg and poach it gently until the whites were barely set, the yolk still runny. Place it over a small mound of reheated rice that had been stirred with a bit of butter, salt, and sometimes chopped parsley if the garden allowed. What you had was a soft, savory dish that filled your belly without emptying your fridge. In the 1950s, rice was becoming more common in American kitchens, thanks in part to wartime rationing, which had introduced families to global staples they might not have tried otherwise. This dish borrowed from that new familiarity, combining simple ingredients into something almost elegant. The egg yolk would soak into the rice, turning each bite into something rich and satisfying. It was also a favorite for older folks, those with tender stomachs, or families watching every penny. You did not need toast when you had this. It was warmth in a bowl. Molasses-crisped apples brought warmth and sweetness to any meal, even when dessert was not on the menu. Thinly sliced apples were tossed in a skillet with a pat of butter, then drizzled with dark molasses and cooked just long enough to soften and brown the edges. The sugar caramelized quickly, coating the fruit in a deep, sticky glaze that smelled like a fall kitchen even in spring. It was a fast way to turn bruised or boring apples into something comforting. Kids loved it because it was sweet. Adults loved it because it felt indulgent without wasting anything. You could eat them alone, serve them over toast, or spoon them next to porridge. If you had access to cream or cottage cheese, even better. Molasses was far cheaper than refined sugar and often used as a substitute in rural homes. And because it had iron and minerals, it was even thought to be strengthening, which gave parents a reason to serve this more often than not. It was simple, rich, and very 1920s, homemade, humble, and ready in under 10 minutes. Puffed oven pancakes, known in some kitchens as Dutch babies, were the dramatic, golden breakfast showstoppers that took almost no effort to make. You would pour a simple batter of eggs, flour, and milk into a hot buttered skillet, then slide it into the oven and watch it puff up like magic. The edges would curl high, the center would bubble gently, and by the time you pulled it out, it looked like something from a bakery window. All it needed was a dusting of powdered sugar, maybe a squeeze of lemon or a spoonful of jam. It felt impressive, almost fancy, but the secret was how easy it truly was. Housewives appreciated the simplicity. Kids loved watching it rise, and everyone at the table dug in before it deflated, which it always did in the most satisfying way. This was the kind of breakfast that turned an ordinary morning into something memorable. Not too sweet, not too rich, and just different enough to feel exciting. One pan, a few ingredients, and suddenly, breakfast was a celebration. Curried deviled ham spread was the bold cousin of the ordinary sandwich filler. The joy of cooking tucked it under quick luncheons, where a handful of ingredients could transform into something unforgettable. Minced ham mixed with mustard, mayonnaise, and a touch of curry powder created a spread both spicy and savory. In 5 minutes, a leftover slice became lunch worth savoring. Served on rye or between saltines, it was a snack that tasted daring for its time. The curry added warmth, while the ham brought comfort, a combination that felt both familiar and new. It was the taste of post-war kitchens discovering spice and possibility. People made it for picnics, teas, or to fill celery sticks for hors d'oeuvres. It was proof that even fast food could be fearless. Cheeseburger. Mac Skillet turned a single pan into a complete dinner that filled plates and quieted hungry stomachs. Elbow macaroni boiled in salted water while ground beef browned in a deep skillet with chopped onions and a dusting of garlic powder. The drained pasta was folded into the sizzling meat along with a handful of shredded cheddar and a splash of milk, creating a creamy sauce as everything mingled over low heat. The smell of melting cheese and seared beef brought everyone to the kitchen before the cook could even call them. In less than 20 minutes, the dish was ready, bubbling and rich, served straight from the pan to eager bowls. Families loved how it combined the familiar taste of a cheeseburger with the comfort of macaroni and cheese, turning two favorites into one speedy supper. Leftovers reheated beautifully, though they rarely lasted long. Affordable, filling, and fun to eat, this skillet meal proved that a fast dinner could still taste like a weekend indulgence, feeding both nostalgia and appetite in every creamy, beefy bite. Egg in a whole toast was one of those fast, comforting breakfasts that managed to make plain old bread and eggs feel like something special in under 10 minutes. You would grab a slice of sandwich bread, cut a circle right out of the center, toss it into a hot skillet with a little butter, and crack an egg into the hole. That was all it took. The bread toasted up golden, the egg cooked right inside, and suddenly breakfast was on the table without much work or money spent. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were hectic, paychecks were stretched thin, and everyone still needed a hot meal before heading out the door. It was a staple for school days, early church mornings, or whenever groceries were low but hunger was high. Some folks added cheese or herbs if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find egg in a hole scribbled on recipe cards tucked into faded cookbooks or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It might feel forgotten today, but back then, this quick breakfast trick kept countless families full, happy, and ready to face the day with just bread, eggs, and a hot skillet. Egg and ketchup stir-fry over rice was the no-fuss pantry lunch that every family had in their back pocket when groceries were running low but bellies still needed filling. You cracked a couple of eggs into a pan, scrambled them up with a little oil, added a squirt of ketchup, and poured the whole thing over leftover rice. That was it. Done in under 10 minutes. Salty, tangy, and surprisingly satisfying for something so simple. Kids loved it because it tasted like breakfast and lunch at the same time, with just enough of that sweet ketchup kick to keep things interesting. Parents leaned on it because it used what they already had in the kitchen. Eggs, rice, and ketchup were always hanging around. Some families added soy sauce, scallions, or even a slice of processed cheese to stretch it further, but most kept it basic and fast. You could find this recipe scribbled in lunch guides, tucked inside old homemaker cookbooks, or passed along by neighbors who knew how to stretch leftovers into a real meal. It was not fancy, but it filled you up when time and money were tight. Beef and onion sandwich spread proved that deli leftovers could turn into a hearty supper in almost no time. Thin slices of roast beef, whether from a weekend dinner or the grocery counter, were chopped fine and folded into a bowl of mayonnaise and diced onions. A splash of Worcestershire sauce and a pinch of black pepper added depth, while the onions provided crunch and a sharp bite. The mixture chilled for just a few minutes while bread toasted and plates were set. Then it was piled thick between slices of rye or soft white sandwich bread. Some families liked a layer of crisp lettuce for freshness, while others spooned the spread onto crackers for an easy snack that still felt like a meal. It stretched a small amount of beef into several servings, saving both time and money while still tasting indulgent. Each bite combined creamy texture with savory meat and a gentle onion heat, the kind of simple pleasure that keeps everyone coming back for seconds. Quick to make, rich to eat, this spread turned odds and ends into a dinner worth remembering, proving that thrift and flavor can happily share the same table. Cheese soufflé omelet was French in name, but American in rhythm. Fast, clever, and quietly impressive. Eggs were beaten until pale and airy, folded with shredded cheese, and poured into a hot skillet where they puffed up like a miracle. In less than 10 minutes, it rose high, golden on top, creamy at the center. The joy of cooking called it a dish for last-minute inspiration, and that it was a breakfast that felt elegant enough for guests, yet simple enough for any weekday morning. The trick was timing, a quick hand, a steady heat, and confidence that it would rise just right. When served, the omelet deflated slightly, settling into a soft cloud of richness that tasted like patience rewarded. It did not need garnish or sauce, just salt, pepper, and pride. Every bite was a balance of air and substance, lightness and care. In a decade chasing efficiency, this dish reminded cooks that speed could still hold beauty. The cheese soufflé omelet was proof that elegance could live in 10 quiet minutes. Bacon and egg breakfast cups were the 1950s answer to the grab-and-go meal, except people were not really going anywhere just yet. These little baked wonders started with a slice of bacon curled around the inside of a muffin tin, then filled with a cracked egg and maybe a sprinkle of cheese or breadcrumbs. They baked up into tidy, self-contained bites that were savory, satisfying, and easy to serve. Housewives loved that they could prep a dozen at once with minimal cleanup, and the novelty of them made even picky kids take notice. It was the kind of breakfast that looked fancier than it was and tasted better than it needed to. Bacon crisped around the edges, the eggs stayed soft in the middle, and each bite had just enough richness to keep you full. They felt modern and efficient in a decade obsessed with kitchen convenience, and that is probably why they stuck around. You can still find versions of them today, but it all started with bacon, eggs, and a muffin tin. Maple cream sandwiches were dessert on a dime. All you needed was graham crackers, a bit of maple-flavored frosting or whipped cream, and a few minutes to assemble. Spread the filling between 2 crackers, press them together, and chill if time allows. That was it. No baking, no pans, just a sugar fix made from pantry staples. Maple syrup was not rare in the 1920s, especially in the Northeast, where small producers tapped trees each spring. Imitation maple flavoring also became popular and cheap. These sandwiches were common in homes that needed dessert without making a pie or cake. They were crisp, sweet, and small enough that you could have 2 or 3 without guilt. Sometimes they were topped with powdered sugar or chocolate, but the original needed no extras. It was proof that a good treat did not need much, just a little creativity and a sweet tooth. Corn fritters with maple drizzle were pure Southern comfort, a 10-minute bridge between hunger and happiness. Corn, fresh or canned, was folded into a light batter of flour, egg, and milk, then dropped into a hot cast-iron skillet where it sizzled and rose into golden pillows. The outside crisped, the inside stayed soft, catching the faint sweetness of the corn. When drizzled with maple syrup, it became something transcendent. Sweet, savory, and nostalgic all at once. The joy of cooking called them a luncheon for all hours, and they lived up to that promise. They appeared at kitchen tables, church picnics, and roadside stands, eaten hot from paper towels while steam still curled into the air. Some cooks added green onion or bacon, others kept them plain, letting simplicity shine. Corn fritters with maple drizzle captured the rhythm of everyday cooking, fast, generous, and full of soul. They were food made to be shared, to be gone too soon. Celery boats with peanut butter and raisins were the fun lunch that every old-school cookbook claimed kids would love, even though most kids quietly picked off the raisins when no one was looking. You sliced celery into sticks, filled the groove with peanut butter, and dotted them with raisins, proudly calling them ants on a log. It came together in 2 minutes flat, looked cute, and somehow counted as lunch when the cupboards were nearly empty. Parents loved it because it was quick, frugal, and felt just healthy enough to avoid the guilt of another peanut butter sandwich. It was simple, crunchy, a little salty, and just filling enough to buy you some time before dinner. Tomato and sugar. Open-faced sandwiches were one of those quirky summer snacks that showed up when gardens were full, money was tight, and lunch had to be quick and simple. You sliced a fresh tomato, buttered a piece of bread, sprinkled sugar over the top, and that was it. A little sweet, a little juicy, and ready in minutes. It sounds strange today, but back then, this was a familiar plate across farm towns and small kitchens all over America. The tomatoes were easy to grow, the bread stretched what you had, and the sugar turned it into a treat that brightened up long summer days. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists were short, and mealtime had to be stretched with what was already growing out back. You would find this simple snack scribbled in old cookbooks, passed around at neighborhood picnics, or taught to kids as one of their first kitchen lessons. It might seem forgotten now, but for plenty of folks back then, tomato and sugar sandwiches were a fast, filling reminder of how far a little garden and a little creativity could go. Italian sausage hoagies brought the flavor of a street fair to the dinner table with little more than a skillet and a few minutes. Pre-cooked Italian sausage links browned quickly until their casings crackled and juices sizzled across the pan. Sliced onions and bell peppers joined the heat, softening and caramelizing as they soaked up the seasoned drippings. Hoagie rolls warmed in the oven until lightly crisp on the outside and tender within. When the vegetables turned golden, the sausages nestled into the rolls, draped with the sweet pepper and onion mixture, and a light scatter of shredded provolone if desired. Each bite balanced smoky spice, soft bread, and the gentle sweetness of slow-cooked vegetables. The meal felt festive, yet required almost no effort, making it a favorite for families who wanted bold taste without a long cooking session. Served with a simple green salad or a handful of chips, these hoagies brought the spirit of an Italian street vendor into a busy kitchen, showing that fast food can still be deeply satisfying and full of character when prepared with care and served piping hot. Bacon cornmeal mush squares were breakfast ingenuity at its finest, a marriage of thrift and comfort passed quietly between generations. Cornmeal, salt, and water came together over heat, thickening into a dense porridge poured into pans to cool overnight. By morning, it cut firm, each slice ready for the skillet. Dropped into bacon drippings, the squares crackled, their edges turning golden and crisp while the centers stayed tender and creamy. The joy of cooking called it poor man's delight, but those who ate it knew better. It was the kind of food that filled both hunger and heart. The smoky aroma of frying bacon wrapped the room like a blanket, mingling with the sweet earthiness of corn. Served with syrup, butter, or a side of eggs, it carried the dual promise of simplicity and satisfaction. Molasses bran muffins were like tiny brown promises that you were doing something good for your body, even if you were not entirely sure how. These muffins were dense, rich, and a little sticky thanks to the molasses, which gave them a deep, almost smoky sweetness that clung to your teeth in the best way. Bran flakes or wheat germ were folded into the batter, turning each bite into a fiber-packed commitment to morning wellness. In the 1950s, people were starting to talk about digestive regularity with a straight face, and these muffins were often the solution. They were baked in batches, wrapped in wax paper, and tucked into lunchboxes or eaten with a cup of coffee and a side of grapefruit. Some homemakers would stir in raisins or nuts. Others kept them plain and honest. Either way, you walked away from breakfast feeling full, virtuous, and just a little proud of yourself. They were not flashy, but they got the job done. And sometimes that is all you need a muffin to do. Oyster cracker soup made the most out of very little. You started with broth, homemade if you had bones or scraps, canned if you did not, and brought it to a boil. Then you stirred in a handful of oyster crackers and let them soak just long enough to soften without turning to mush. That was the whole recipe. Some people added a sprinkle of parsley or a pat of butter, but this soup was never about extravagance. It was about comfort. Oyster crackers were cheap, sold in large tins and kept for ages in a cool pantry. When paired with warm broth, they transformed into something soothing and starchy, perfect for sick days, cold nights, or tight budgets. Children loved the texture. Adults appreciated how quickly it came together. It was the kind of dish you could make with almost nothing, yet still sit down and feel like you had a proper meal. In a decade where time was short and money even shorter, oyster cracker soup became a staple in homes that knew how to stretch every spoonful. Quick cream of tomato soup was the post-war kitchen's answer to exhaustion, comfort built in the time it took the kettle to boil. Canned tomato soup, that pantry staple of mid-century America, was transformed into something rich and silky with a few simple touches. Milk replaced water, giving it warmth and body, while a pinch of baking soda kept it smooth and bright. The joy of cooking recommended a pat of butter at the end, letting it melt into a glossy swirl of richness. Served alongside crackers or a grilled cheese sandwich, it became more than a meal. Skillet hot dogs with onions and peppers brought the flavor of a street cart into the kitchen without the need for a grill. Hot dogs were scored and browned in a cast-iron pan, while sliced onions and bell peppers sautéed beside them in a little butter and salt. The vegetables softened and caramelized, releasing a sweetness that mingled with the smoky scent of the searing meat. Split rolls were toasted directly in the same pan to catch every bit of flavor. In less than 10 minutes, the hot dogs were nestled into the warm bread and piled high with the pepper and onion mixture. A quick dinner that felt indulgent and hearty. Families loved the one-pan cleanup and the way the dish fed a group with minimal effort. Each bite carried the taste of summer fairs and city sidewalks, proving that even a humble hot dog can become a meal worth remembering when time is short and hunger is strong. Quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes was one of those meals that showed up when there was not much left in the pantry, but families still needed dinner on the table fast. You boiled some elbow macaroni, opened a can of stewed tomatoes, and stirred it all together with salt, pepper, and a little butter if you could spare it. That was it. It sounds humble, but back when budgets were tight and grocery trips were rare, this simple stovetop meal came through. The pasta filled you up, the tomatoes added flavor, and it all came together in under 10 minutes. You would find recipes like this scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next, or clipped from women's magazines that promised fast, filling meals on a shoestring budget. It might seem plain now, but quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes helped plenty of families stretch their groceries and make dinner happen, even on the hardest days. Egg and potato. Hash turned scraps into a filling supper that could be on the table before the day's stories were finished. Leftover boiled potatoes were diced and tossed into a hot skillet with a bit of butter until their edges crisped to a golden brown. Eggs were cracked directly over the sizzling potatoes, their yolks breaking to coat each bite in a rich sauce as they cooked. A sprinkle of salt, pepper, and maybe a dash of paprika was all it needed. The aroma of frying potatoes and eggs promised satisfaction and thrift, a meal built from yesterday's extras and today's needs. Served straight from the pan, the hash invited everyone to eat family style, forks clinking as the steam rose. It proved that speed never had to sacrifice comfort and that the best dinners often came from making the most of what was already on hand. Fried apple sandwiches were born from hard times but carried forward through love and habit, the kind of food that soothed even before the first bite. Thin slices of tart apple were dredged in sugar and sometimes dusted with cinnamon, then fried in butter until the kitchen filled with that unmistakable scent, sweet, smoky, and warm. Once softened, the fruit was pressed between toasted bread, the butter seeping into every crumb. The joy of cooking reintroduced it as a Depression-era relic worth remembering, a dessert, breakfast, or comfort meal depending on the hour. The apples melted slightly, becoming something between pie filling and jam, a pocket of golden sweetness. Families who had little turned it into plenty, passing the recipe along as both sustenance and story. Served with hot tea or black coffee, it tasted of home, thrift, and tenderness. Fried apple sandwiches were proof that a little sugar, heat, and hope could feed the soul. Peanut butter toast with sliced apples was the picture of modern efficiency in the mid-century kitchen. Magazines and nutrition guides at the time were filled with advice on how to build a balanced breakfast, and this little combo checked all the boxes. Whole grain toast if you had it, white bread if you did not, topped with a swipe of peanut butter and a few thin slices of apple. Quick to make, packed with protein and sweet enough to keep the kids quiet for a few minutes. The apples added crunch and brightness, while the peanut butter gave it enough heft to hold you through school or work. Some families added a drizzle of honey, others a sprinkle of cinnamon, but even plain, it was satisfying. It was the kind of breakfast that made people feel like they were moving into a new, better era, something faster, cleaner, and smarter. If you were trying to stretch groceries or just keep up with the times, peanut butter and apples were your allies. Horseradish and beet spread was bold, magenta-colored, and not afraid to clear your sinuses. Grated cooked beets were stirred together with freshly grated horseradish root and folded into sour cream. The result was a spicy, earthy, slightly sweet spread that worked wonders on rye bread or crackers. Served cold, it was a common part of 1920s appetizer plates and cold lunches, especially among Eastern European households where both ingredients were staples. The beets provided color and body, while the horseradish added heat that hit the nose before the tongue. It came together fast, needing no cooking, just mixing and chilling. If fresh horseradish was not available, the jarred kind worked fine. Some recipes added vinegar, others sugar, depending on what was on hand. But even the most stripped-down version had personality. This was not a quiet little tea sandwich filling. It announced itself. And for people who were tired of bland or plain, it was a wake-up call. In homes where meals had to be stretched, this spread offered bold flavor in small bites. You did not need much, just enough to remember it. Minute steak with onion gravy delivered the taste of a slow Sunday supper in a fraction of the time. Ultra-thin beef steaks hit a hot skillet and browned within moments, releasing a rich aroma as they seared. After the meat was set aside, sliced onions cooked in the drippings until they softened and turned sweet. Then a splash of beef broth and a dusting of flour transformed the pan juices into a smooth, savory gravy. The steaks returned to the pan for a brief simmer, soaking up the onion-infused sauce. Served with buttered toast or a mound of mashed potatoes, the dish tasted like comfort that had taken all afternoon, even though it was ready in less than 20 minutes. Families appreciated its hearty flavor and quick cleanup, while the fragrant gravy made the kitchen smell welcoming and warm. Each forkful combined tender beef and silky onions, a reminder that a satisfying meal does not require hours of preparation when technique and simple ingredients come together perfectly. Canned sardine and onion sandwiches were the bold, briny lunches that never pretended to be fancy, but quietly stuck around in old cookbooks for decades. You opened a can of sardines, layered them onto bread, added thin slices of raw onion, and called it lunch. That was it, done in minutes and packing more flavor than most people could handle. It was a Depression-era staple that kept going because sardines were cheap, lasted forever, and gave a salty, filling meal with almost no prep. Some folks added mustard or lettuce, but most kept it plain and sharp. The onions gave crunch and heat, the sardines brought salt and oil, and together, it was the kind of lunch that stuck with you, whether you liked it or not. Families leaned on meals like this because they filled you up when the fridge was empty and the grocery budget was tight. You could find this recipe tucked into old homemaker guides listed under quick lunches or pantry meals. It was strong, weirdly satisfying, and pure old-school practicality on a plate. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were a quick, sweet little snack that kept plenty of kids going when there was not much else to pack in their lunchbox. You took a slice of sandwich bread, rolled it flat with a rolling pin or a glass, spread on jelly, and rolled it up tight. That was all there was to it. It sounds simple now, but back then, this was the kind of treat that showed up when families had to stretch every dollar. It was fast, easy, and made use of pantry staples that were always on hand. You would find these roll-ups tucked into school lunches, brought to church picnics, or passed around as after-school snacks when groceries were running low. The jelly added sweetness, the bread kept it filling, and it all came together in just a few minutes. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, these jelly roll-ups were a quick fix that kept kids happy and parents sane. Steak tips with garlic butter turned small pieces of beef into a dinner that tasted far more luxurious than the clock allowed. Bite-sized cubes of steak were seasoned with salt and pepper, then seared quickly in a smoking hot skillet until browned on the outside and just tender within. As the meat rested for a moment, butter melted in the pan with minced garlic and a handful of fresh parsley, creating a sauce that smelled like a steakhouse. The sizzling butter was poured back over the meat, coating every piece in rich, garlicky flavor. Served over toast, rice, or even plain with a side of vegetables, the dish offered restaurant-style indulgence in the time it took to set the table. Families loved how a modest amount of beef could feel like a feast, and the sound of butter hitting the hot pan became a signal that the day's work was over and something delicious was ready. Banana coffee milkshake was the breakfast of speed and optimism, born in the pages of the 1950s when mornings had to move fast. Sliced banana, chilled milk, instant coffee, and a spoonful of sugar met in the blender for less than a minute, turning into something smooth, rich, and surprisingly elegant. The Joy of Cooking called it an energy drink. Though no one used the term then, it was simply the fuel for a modern life. Housewives drank it between errands, students sipped it before school. The banana softened the coffee's bitterness, giving it a mellow sweetness that felt indulgent but practical. It was the flavor of a time when progress meant convenience and health came bottled in glass. Served cold in tall cups with a straw, it captured the joy of new technology. Blenders, freezers, fridges, machines that promised to make living lighter. The banana coffee milkshake was more than breakfast. It was the taste of change. It proved that even the busiest mornings could start with something comforting, cool, and quick. Quick lima bean puree was the kind of side dish that took no more than 10 minutes but felt like it took some planning. You opened a can of lima beans, gave them a rinse, and then mashed them smooth with a little butter, salt, and pepper. If you had garlic or parsley, you could throw that in too. Some people added a splash of vinegar or lemon juice just to brighten things up. It could be served warm, like mashed potatoes, or cold as a spread on toast or crackers. What made it so special was how versatile it was. You could dress it up or down depending on what was around. For working-class homes and rural kitchens, this was one of those dishes that always showed up on the table because it was dependable, nutritious, and incredibly cheap. Lima beans were a pantry staple, and this method of turning them into something soft and seasoned made them more appealing to picky eaters too. It was fast, filling, and easy to make in batches. When you needed something hearty without the weight, this little mashup saved the day. Cottage cheese pancakes were a bit of a surprise, light, fluffy, and somehow richer than they had any right to be. Back then, cottage cheese was not a diet food or a sad side dish. It was a protein-packed miracle that found its way into everything, including pancakes. You would fold the cheese into a simple batter of eggs, flour, and milk, and the result was tender pancakes with a slight tang and an almost creamy bite. These were not sugar bombs. They were clean, filling, and quietly nutritious. Housewives looking to stretch a carton of eggs or cut down on flour loved them, and health-conscious families welcomed the change from typical flapjacks. You might top them with applesauce, sour cream, or just a pat of butter and a pinch of salt. They cooked quickly, smelled fantastic, and had the kind of texture that makes you pause between bites. Cottage cheese pancakes were proof that you could eat smart without feeling like you were missing out. Vegetable fried rice with leftover meat transformed scraps and day-old rice into a fragrant dinner in less than 15 minutes. Cold cooked rice was the key, each grain separating as it hit the hot oil of a wide skillet or wok. Bits of carrot, peas, and diced onions followed, their colors brightening as they sizzled. Leftover meat, whether pork chops, chicken, or beef, was sliced thin and tossed in with a splash of soy sauce and a drizzle of sesame oil. A quick scramble of eggs in the corner of the pan finished the dish, binding everything together with soft ribbons. The result was smoky and savory, carrying the scent of garlic and ginger through the house. Families appreciated how it cleared the refrigerator of odds and ends while creating a meal that tasted planned and special. Served hot straight from the pan, it proved that yesterday's rice and scraps of meat could become a satisfying dinner that rivaled takeout, saving both time and money without sacrificing flavor or comfort. Jellied chicken salad cups were the quirky retro lunch you probably saw at your grandmother's house or flipped past in old homemaker guides. You made chicken salad, shredded chicken, mayo, celery, a little seasoning, and then set the whole thing in gelatin until it firmed up. It sounds strange now, but back then, this was peak luncheon presentation. You scooped the wobbly salad into lettuce leaves, added a sprig of parsley or a cherry tomato, and served it cold. It was light, chilled, and looked fancier than the ingredients actually were. These showed up at potlucks, garden parties, and quick family lunches when the oven stayed off and time was short. Gelatin molds made everything feel more polished, even when it came straight from leftovers and pantry basics. Old cookbooks loved recipes like this because they stretched food, required no cooking, and made lunch look impressive with barely any effort. It might feel out of place today, but jellied chicken salad cups were fast, filling, and weirdly fun when they first hit the table. Cottage cheese and peach. Half plate was the kind of quick meal that felt just fancy enough to pass for lunch, even when the fridge was nearly empty. You opened a can of peach halves, plopped them on a plate, and added a big scoop of cottage cheese right in the center. That was it. 10 minutes, maybe less. It sounds odd now, but back then, this sweet and savory combo showed up at church teas, ladies' luncheons, and weekday meals when time and money were both running low. It was light, refreshing, and filled just enough of that hunger gap to get you through the afternoon. You could dress it up with a little sprinkle of nutmeg or a cherry on top if you were feeling fancy, but most kept it simple. It came from a time when canned fruit was a pantry staple, cottage cheese counted as protein, and families got creative to stretch every dollar. Another forgotten classic from the old cookbook that kept homes running smoothly. Breakfast for dinner. Pancake stack with bacon turned a morning favorite into a fun and filling evening meal. Flour, milk, eggs, and a little baking powder whisked together quickly to form a smooth batter that poured onto a sizzling griddle, sending up a sweet, buttery aroma. Each pancake bubbled and browned in just minutes, ready to stack high while crisp bacon strips cooked in a nearby skillet. The smoky scent of bacon mingled with the warm fragrance of fresh pancakes, creating a kitchen atmosphere both cozy and exciting. Butter melted between layers, while a slow drizzle of warm maple syrup cascaded over the stack, soaking each fluffy round. The salty bacon provided the perfect counterpoint to the soft, sweet pancakes, making every bite a blend of textures and tastes. Families loved the playful switch of serving breakfast at the end of the day, and cleanup was minimal, leaving more time to relax. In less than 20 minutes, this meal offered pure comfort and a gentle reminder that the best dinners are sometimes the ones that break the rules in the most delicious way possible. Lemon icebox pudding cups were joy in chilled form, born from a time when refrigeration felt like a small miracle. Whipped cream, sugar, lemon juice, and crushed cookies were folded together in a bowl until they became something like edible sunshine. The joy of cooking called it a quick wonder, a recipe that captured light and ease in the span of a single afternoon. Poured into glass dishes and set in the icebox, it chilled into a dessert that looked as bright as it tasted. Tart met sweet in every spoonful, the coolness cutting through the summer heat or long evenings of chatter and card games. Housewives adored it because it was reliable, never fussy, always elegant. It required no oven, no skill, only care and timing. Served with a twist of lemon zest or a crumbly cookie on top, it glowed in the lamplight like gold. Every bite carried the optimism of modernity, when convenience and beauty finally shared a kitchen. Lemon icebox pudding cups reminded a generation that happiness could be simple, sweet, and cool enough to last until tomorrow. Toad in the hole was the kind of breakfast that made you smile even before you took the first bite. It was simple. Take a slice of white bread, cut a hole in the middle, and crack an egg into the empty space while it sizzled in a buttered pan. As the egg cooked, the bread toasted in the pan, turning golden and crisp around the edges. The cutout lid was toasted alongside and used to dip into the runny yolk. It was silly, it was fun, and it was a genius way to make eggs feel new. Kids absolutely loved it. It looked like something out of a cartoon, and adults found it just as satisfying. In the 1950s, this was an easy, hands-on breakfast that made mornings feel a little brighter. No extra dishes, no long prep, just something warm and filling that could be made in under 10 minutes. Breakfast did not have to be complicated. Sometimes it just needed a little charm. Graham cracker porridge sounds like something invented for children, but it showed up in kitchens of all kinds during the 1920s. You crushed graham crackers, those sweet, weedy rectangles, and simmered them in hot milk with a pinch of salt and maybe a sprinkle of cinnamon. That was all it took to make a soft, sweet porridge that felt like dessert for breakfast. It cooked in minutes and was especially popular for kids, invalids, and anyone needing a gentle start to the day. Some added butter, others a drizzle of honey or molasses, but the heart of the dish was always the graham cracker itself. These crackers were a common pantry item, cheap and shelf-stable, and perfect for stretching into something bigger. This porridge had a soft, pudding-like texture and carried a warm, comforting smell that made cold mornings feel a little better. In the 1920s, nutrition advice often encouraged warm, simple meals for energy and digestion, and graham cracker porridge checked every box. It was quick, filling, and surprisingly wholesome. A poor man's breakfast, maybe, but it never tasted like one. Mayonnaise and pineapple salad might sound odd now, but back in Grandma's day, it was one of those quirky little recipes that everyone knew how to throw together in minutes. You grabbed a can of pineapple slices, plopped them on a plate, added a dollop of mayonnaise, and sprinkled on shredded cheddar if you had it. It was sweet, tangy, creamy, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added a cherry on top to dress it up, but most kept it plain and practical. You would see this salad at potlucks, church socials, or as a quick side dish on busy weeknights when dinner needed help stretching. It was fast, used ingredients people always had around, and filled that gap between sweet and savory in a way that only vintage recipes could. Today, people might wrinkle their noses at the thought, but back then, it was a 10-minute solution to hungry families and empty cupboards. Another forgotten gem from the cookbook that kept so many homes running. Cream cheese and olive sandwiches were once the fancy tea lunch that quietly slipped onto regular kitchen tables when people needed something fast. You whipped cream cheese until fluffy, stirred in chopped green olives, and spread the whole mix onto rye or white bread. It sounds strange now, but back then, this salty, creamy combo was considered upscale, especially if you cut the crusts off. It showed up at luncheons, garden parties, and even school lunches when moms wanted to make something that looked like they tried. Old cookbooks listed it under easy entertaining, but most folks made it because it came together in 5 minutes and filled you up without cooking a thing. Some people swapped in pimento olives or added sliced cucumbers, but the classic version stayed simple, creamy, salty, and fast. It may not win over modern taste buds, but for families watching the clock and the grocery bill, these little sandwiches were a retro shortcut that stuck around when time was tight. Cornmeal. Crusted catfish fillets brought the taste of a southern fish fry to the table in minutes, turning thin fillets into golden perfection. A simple dredge of cornmeal seasoned with salt, pepper, and a hint of cayenne coated the fish, while oil heated in a cast-iron skillet. As soon as the fillets touched the pan, they sizzled and released a savory aroma that promised a feast. In only a few minutes, each side crisped to a deep golden brown, while the flesh stayed tender and flaky. Remember those working man's dinners you could make in just 10 minutes after a long day on the line? These dinners filled mid-century kitchens with quick heat, heavy plates, and the smell of hard work turning into comfort. What did those rushed but satisfying nights give us that slower meals never could? Wheaties with warm milk and banana slices might sound painfully simple today, but in the 1950s, this was the definition of a balanced breakfast. Before we had protein bars and energy drinks, there was this: a bowl of America's favorite cereal, softened with warm milk and topped with slices of whatever fruit you had on hand, usually bananas. Warm milk was not just a cozy touch, it was a trick parents used to make breakfast feel like a hug. Bananas brought in that natural sweetness and texture, and Wheaties were advertised as the breakfast of champions for a reason. This was the meal of athletes, go-getters, and school kids with scraped knees and high hopes. Mothers believed in it, kids depended on it, and the radio jingle pretty much sealed the deal. If you grew up in the post-war years, chances are this was on your table more than once. It was not flashy, it was not rich, but it was dependable and good, qualities that mattered more than anything else back then. Canned peas with cream sauce were the definition of a humble side dish that pulled more than its weight. You took a can of peas, drained it, and dropped them into a quick stovetop roux made from flour, butter, and milk. A pinch of salt, maybe some pepper or dried thyme if it was handy, and you had something smooth and savory on your hands. The peas went tender fast. There was no need to cook them long, and the sauce brought everything together in a way that felt a little fancy without being fussy. It was a trick passed around through cookbooks and kitchen counters alike, especially in households trying to stretch a single can across a whole table. It worked next to potatoes, toast, or even scrambled eggs. Cream sauce added richness, body, and just enough warmth to make you forget the dish had come from a tin. During the 1920s, canned goods were becoming more widespread and affordable, and this recipe was a way to make something shelf-stable taste home-cooked. It may have taken under 10 minutes to make, but it stayed with you, especially when dinner had to be done before the stove even got hot. Cold salmon mousse cups were the graceful darlings of mid-century entertaining, designed to impress guests without ever showing the rush behind the scenes. Leftover salmon was whipped with cream, lemon juice, and a touch of gelatin until pale, airy, and smooth, then spooned into small glass cups or molded into rings to chill. The joy of cooking listed it proudly under quick canapés, promising elegance in under 15 minutes. Served with crisp crackers, buttered toast, or cool cucumber slices, it was delicate yet rich, a recipe that turned scraps into sophistication. It spoke of hosts who knew how to make beauty from little, how to transform the ordinary into something memorable. The mousse shimmered lightly under soft light, its surface smooth as silk. Guests would take one bite and pause, a quiet moment of surprise at how light, refreshing, and lovely it was. Cold salmon mousse cups were more than food. They were confidence made edible, a gesture of care disguised as ease. Even now, one taste could still call back the calm glamour of the 1950s table. Tomato soup with cracker crumble was the ultimate quick fix when groceries were low and appetites were high. You heated up a can of tomato soup, crushed some saltines over the top, and called it a meal. It sounds basic, but it hit the spot. Grandma's cookbook was full of these quick, practical recipes that stretched every last pantry staple, and this one was no exception. The saltines soaked up the soup, adding just enough crunch and thickness to make it filling. Parents loved it because it cost next to nothing and came together in 10 minutes flat. Kids loved it because it was warm, salty, and familiar. You could always dress it up with a sprinkle of cheese or some pepper, but most families kept it plain and simple. It was the kind of meal you would find after school, in chilly weather, or on those nights when there just was not time for anything else. Fast, affordable, and quietly forgotten, like so many of the recipes tucked into the back pages of Grandma's old cookbook. Zucchini fritters from leftovers were the garden surplus lunch that turned backyard vegetables into something hot, crispy, and filling when you had more zucchini than you knew what to do with. You grated up those extra zucchinis, mixed them with flour, eggs, and a little seasoning, then pan-fried them until golden brown. It was quick, cheap, and showed up in nearly every Use Your Garden Haul cookbook from the 1970s. Backyard gardens always seemed to over-deliver on zucchini, and fritters were a fast, satisfying way to keep all that produce from going to waste. They crisped up around the edges, stayed soft in the center, and felt just hearty enough to pass for lunch. Some families added shredded cheese, herbs, or breadcrumbs to stretch them further, but most kept it simple with just the basics. It was frugal, filling, and practical, a classic example of how families made the most of what they grew. It might not have been exciting, but zucchini fritters worked hard to keep plates full and grocery spending low. Shrimp Wiggle was one of those mid-century wonders that sounded playful but tasted like pure indulgence. Canned shrimp were folded into a quick cream sauce made with milk, butter, and flour, then brightened with a handful of green peas. It was served bubbling hot over saltine crackers or toast, ready in 10 minutes and perfect for company. The joy of cooking presented it as a pantry meal, proof that elegance could live in a can. The name alone made people smile, a hint that mealtime could still be fun even when rushed. The sauce shimmered pale pink, the shrimp tender and mild. It was a dish that combined thrift with theater, turning modest ingredients into something you would never call ordinary. The moment you broke through the creamy layer with your fork, steam carried the scent of butter and the sea. It was quick cooking at its finest, cheerful, comforting, and quietly clever. Turkey Club sandwich plate turned a deli standard into a full dinner that felt hearty and fresh. Triple layers of toasted bread held slices of roasted turkey, crisp bacon, ripe tomatoes, and crunchy lettuce, each tier spread with a thin layer of mayonnaise for tang. The stack was secured with toothpicks and sliced into neat quarters, revealing colorful layers that looked as good as they tasted. A side of potato chips or a handful of pickles completed the plate, adding crunch and variety. Because it required no cooking beyond a quick toast and bacon fry, the meal came together in minutes, making it ideal for hot evenings or late nights when a stove felt out of the question. Each bite offered a balance of smoky, salty, and fresh flavors that satisfied even the hungriest diner. Families loved how it felt both casual and substantial. A dinner that borrowed the best of a classic lunch while proving that a sandwich can indeed stand proudly as the evening's main event. Cold spaghetti with Italian dressing was one of those forgotten leftover tricks that stretched a single meal into something new without much time or money spent. You would take last night's spaghetti, rinse it off if needed, toss it in a splash of bottled Italian dressing, and that was dinner or lunch, ready in under 10 minutes. It sounds plain, but back then, this was an easy, thrifty way to keep food from going to waste and keep everyone fed. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists ran short and leftovers became the next meal. The dressing added tang, the pasta filled you up, and it all came together cold, quick, and satisfying. You would find cold spaghetti with Italian dressing scribbled in community cookbooks, passed along at potlucks, or quietly traded between neighbors looking for affordable meal ideas. Some folks tossed in vegetables or cheese if they had any left, but most kept it simple and practical. It might feel forgotten now, but back then this cold pasta salad was a staple for families trying to stretch their meals, save their money, and still have something satisfying on the table without turning on the stove. Banana and mayonnaise sandwiches were one of those strange little miracles of the 1920s kitchen. It sounds odd now, but back then, the sweet and savory combination was not only accepted, it was celebrated. Sliced bananas were laid gently on white bread, and mayonnaise acted like the glue that held the whole thing together. No butter, no jam, just banana and mayo. It was a quick lunchbox staple for children and adults alike, partly because both ingredients were cheap and widely available. Bananas had become more common thanks to improved transportation, and mayonnaise was starting to show up in homes as a ready-made product. It helped that refrigeration was still unreliable for many families, so shelf-stable or naturally resistant foods were a practical choice. This sandwich was quick to prepare, filling enough to stand in for a small meal, and easy to eat on the go. It was also one of those things that people either loved or quietly avoided, depending on which side of the sandwich war you fell on. But if your family made it in the 1920s, chances are you have at least one memory of someone munching on this creamy, fruity creation with zero hesitation. Savory grits with butter and salt were the quiet kind of comfort food. Nothing flashy, but warm and reliable in a way that mattered. In the South, grits were breakfast royalty, made from ground hominy and simmered low and slow until they reached that perfect creamy texture. Some folks used milk, others just water, but what tied them all together was that generous swirl of butter and a heavy pinch of salt. No sugar, no syrup, just something simple that stuck to your ribs and felt like home. For many families, this was an everyday staple, served in chipped bowls on quiet mornings. Housewives liked it because it was cheap and easy to make in big batches. Kids liked it because it filled them up without complaint. And anyone who tasted it knew that no matter how plain it looked, it delivered where it counted. It was also endlessly adaptable. Later in the day, you could add cheese or an egg and call it lunch. But in the morning, just as it was enough. Ham and pineapple foldovers were the decade's love letter to sweet and savory living. Thin slices of ham were topped with pineapple rings, brushed with mustard, and broiled on bread or biscuit halves until the edges crisped. The result was warm, tangy, and quick, a meal fit for both lunch and company. The joy of cooking listed it as a 10-minute sandwich, perfect for unexpected guests or late-night suppers. It was food that wore a smile, bright, colorful, unapologetically mid-century. The pineapple's sweetness met the salty ham in perfect balance, every bite delivering nostalgia in flavor form. These sandwiches sat proudly on holiday tables and weekday trays alike, their simplicity making them timeless. A sprinkle of grated cheese on top made them even better, melting into golden bubbles. It was fast food before the term existed, homemade and proud. Each foldover told the story of an era that loved flair without the weight. Cheddar and broccoli omelet made a hearty egg dinner with bright color and bold flavor in minutes. Eggs were whisked with a splash of milk and a pinch of black pepper, then poured into a hot skillet where butter foamed at the edges. Fresh or frozen broccoli florets steamed quickly in the microwave or in a small pan, keeping their green snap and gentle sweetness. As the eggs began to set, sharp cheddar cheese was scattered across the surface, releasing a nutty scent as it melted. The broccoli folded inside added texture and an earthy contrast to the creamy eggs. In less than 10 minutes, the omelet slid onto a plate, golden on the outside and gooey within. Served with toasted bread or a handful of greens, it offered both comfort and nourishment, proving that dinner can be simple, yet feel complete. This dish turned basic staples into a meal that pleased everyone at the table while leaving only one pan to wash, making it ideal for nights when time and patience were in short supply, but good food was still essential. Cheese dreams were the open-faced, melty sandwiches that turned plain old white bread into lunch in under 10 minutes. You laid out a slice of bread, topped it with American cheese, and stuck it under the broiler until bubbly and browned. If you had extras lying around, you could throw on a tomato slice or a strip of bacon, but most folks kept it simple. Cheese dreams popped up in every old-school cookbook as a lifesaver for hungry kids, rushed workdays or weekends when grocery shopping had not happened yet. It was one of those lunches that made the most of cheap pantry basics, but still felt warm and filling. The cheese bubbled up golden and gooey, The edges of the bread crisped up just enough, and lunch was done before you even had time to set the table. Families loved it because it tasted good, cost next to nothing, and required zero effort. It was one of those old-fashioned meals that looked like a shortcut but stuck around because it simply worked when time and money were both tight. Egg salad on toast was one of those practical 10-minute meals that filled lunch boxes, fed tired workers, and showed up in every community cookbook for good reason. Leftover boiled eggs were never wasted. You chopped them up, mixed them with mayonnaise, maybe a little mustard if you were lucky, and piled it all onto a slice of toast. It sounds plain, but it got the job done. The eggs were filling, the toast made it portable, and you could whip it up in no time flat. This was not about fancy ingredients or gourmet flavors. It was the kind of recipe people leaned on when money was tight, time was short, and families still had to eat. You would see it at church luncheons, quick weekday dinners, or scribbled down on worn recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but egg salad on toast kept plenty of households going when they needed it most. Country ham and red-eye gravy brought a bold, salty kick to the end of a long day, drawing on traditions that went back generations. Thin slices of country ham hit a hot skillet and sizzled until their edges crisped and their smoky scent filled the kitchen. Once the meat was removed, strong black coffee was poured into the pan to deglaze the savory bits, blending with a splash of water and a touch of butter to create the dark, rich gravy that gave the dish its name. The result was a sauce both bitter and savory, perfect for spooning over the ham or soaking into warm biscuits. In less than 15 minutes, the table held a meal that tasted slow, cooked, and soulful. Working families appreciated the speed while still honoring a Southern classic, and the sharp aroma of coffee and ham became a sign that dinner was ready. Each bite balanced salt, smoke, and a subtle bitterness, a reminder of farmhouse suppers where nothing was wasted and flavor came from skill and tradition rather than expensive ingredients. Buttermilk dressing slaw was the bright, tangy salad that anchored Southern tables in the middle of the century. Shredded cabbage, sometimes with carrot or onion, was tossed with a quick dressing of buttermilk, vinegar, sugar, and a touch of mustard. The joy of cooking listed it as a quick mix that required no resting time, no patience, just appetite. It was crisp, creamy, and sharp all at once, balancing heavier dishes with freshness and bite. Served at picnics, barbecues, and Sunday suppers, it was both side and savior, something that tied every plate together. The tang of the buttermilk lingered pleasantly, cooling rich meats and fried foods. Every family had its own secret, more sugar for sweetness, more vinegar for bite, but the feeling stayed the same. It was food meant for laughter, outdoor tables, and full hearts. Buttermilk dressing slaw may have been made fast, but its taste stayed long after the plates were cleared. Peach coffee cake with crumb topping was the kind of breakfast that turned heads at church potlucks and family gatherings alike. Whether made with canned peaches or the real thing from a backyard tree, the fruit gave it a bright, syrupy flavor that soaked into the soft cake underneath. The crumb topping, made from butter, sugar, and flour, baked into a crispy golden crust that added texture and sweetness to every bite. Housewives loved it because it could be made ahead of time, sliced easily, and served warm or cold with a pot of coffee nearby. It was one of those reliable, crowd-pleasing recipes that got passed around on handwritten cards and folded into old cookbooks with floury smudges on the pages. Kids liked it because it was basically dessert for breakfast, and no one was there to stop them. The best versions were tender in the middle, loaded with peach slices, and generous with the crumb on top. It was both fancy and familiar, and in the 1950s, that combination made it a household favorite. The asparagus and egg salad was one of those elegant-sounding dishes that was really just smart use of canned food. You drained canned asparagus spears, chopped them into bite-sized pieces, and mixed them with sliced boiled eggs and a tangy dressing. Sometimes it was just vinegar and oil, sometimes mustard and herbs. But it was always fast, cool, and surprisingly filling. This dish became popular not just for its taste, but because it looked fresh and green even in the dead of winter. Canned asparagus gave a touch of luxury to households that could not afford fresh greens often. The eggs added protein and weight, turning the salad into a complete meal in 10 minutes or less. It was often served on a bed of lettuce or with crackers on the side, and it became a go-to for ladies' luncheons and quick Sunday suppers. Like many 1920s recipes, it made the most of pantry goods and added just enough flair to make you feel like you were eating something special, even if it came straight from a can. Celery and olive sandwiches were the quiet, crisp heart of many bridge clubs and ladies' luncheons. Finely chopped celery mixed with sliced green olives and mayonnaise was spread thick between soft white bread, crusts neatly trimmed. The result was light, salty, and refreshing. A bite that crunched softly and vanished fast. They were the definition of elegance in simplicity, the kind of food that appeared without fanfare, but stayed in memory. The joy of cooking tucked this one away under quick sandwiches, proof that you could make something graceful in minutes. Served with tea or lemonade, they were more social ritual than recipe. Their freshness offset heavier dishes, making them a reliable favorite at every gathering. One bite was enough to recall the clink of china and the sound of soft laughter. It was food for conversation, light as air but full of care, the taste of a gentler time. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet might raise a few eyebrows today, but back then it was pure practicality in a pan. You sliced up hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and poured in a can of creamed corn. It bubbled and thickened in minutes, turning into this sweet, salty, creamy meal that filled everyone up fast. You would not find it in fancy cookbooks or glossy magazines, but you would definitely see it scribbled onto a recipe card tucked in Grandma's kitchen drawer. It made use of cheap pantry staples, stretched meat farther, and showed up on busy nights when nobody wanted to cook. Kids loved the weird sweetness, parents loved how far a can of corn could go, and it all came together in under 10 minutes. It sounds strange now, but for families watching every penny, it was comfort food that made do with what little they had. Another forgotten quick fix that quietly slipped off dinner tables over time. Green bean and egg salad was one of those quick, cold meals that filled plates fast and stretched what little food families had during tough times. You opened a can of green beans, sliced up some boiled eggs, tossed it all together with mayonnaise, and that was it. A little creamy, a little savory, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might not sound fancy today, but back then, this quick salad showed up at church potlucks, summer picnics, and weekday lunches when the pantry was running low. The eggs added protein, the beans filled you up, and the mayo brought it all together in a creamy, satisfying bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because they used simple ingredients that were always on hand and turned them into meals that kept everyone fed. You would find this one scribbled in old cookbooks, passed along by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of quick meal fixes. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of families back then, green bean and egg salad was a go-to plate that saved time, money, and groceries. Quick ham salad on saltines was the fast-fix lunch that made diced ham, mayo, and a little pickle relish stretch way further than you would think. You chopped leftover ham, mixed it with mayonnaise and relish, and spooned it onto a stack of crackers. That was lunch, done in minutes and surprisingly filling. Old cookbooks loved this recipe for being cheap, easy, and portable, which is why it kept popping up in school lunch guides and picnic sections. You could dress it up with celery or onions, but most families kept it simple with just ham, mayo, and a little crunch. It might not look like much, but it worked when you needed protein, salt, and something satisfying without standing over a stove. The saltines soaked up just enough moisture, the ham salad added creaminess, and together it passed for lunch, even when the fridge was running low. Ranchero bean tostadas brought the lively spirit of a cantina to the weeknight table using only a few ingredients. Crisp corn tortillas toasted under the broiler formed a sturdy base for creamy refried beans straight from the can, warmed with a dash of cumin and a spoonful of diced tomatoes. A quick sprinkle of shredded cheddar melted under the heat, creating a golden crust that held everything together. Fresh salsa, sliced jalapenos, and a handful of chopped cilantro added color and brightness, turning a simple pantry meal into a vibrant feast. In less than 15 minutes, each tostada emerged hot and ready, inviting everyone to add their favorite toppings like sour cream or diced avocado. The crunchy base and savory beans offered a satisfying contrast that pleased both children and adults, proving that meatless dinners can still feel indulgent and filling. Every bite carried smoky spice and fresh garden flavor, perfect for nights when time was short, but a craving for bold taste remained strong, making this dish a regular star in kitchens that celebrated speed and flavor in equal measure. Orange juice gelatin cubes were like the breakfast version of a science project, with a little bit of fun, a little bit of vitamin C, and a whole lot of jiggle. Housewives in the 1950s were always looking for new ways to make breakfast exciting, especially for kids who were not easily impressed by porridge or toast. So you would take orange juice, usually from concentrate, and mix it with gelatin to make these soft, bouncy cubes that tasted like sunshine. Served cold and cut into tidy squares, they were refreshing, colorful, and a little bit playful. Some versions added grated carrots or bits of canned pineapple, depending on what you had on hand. It was not fancy, but it felt modern, like something out of a home economics textbook. Kids loved the wobble, adults liked the vitamins, and everyone appreciated a break from the usual. In a time before smoothie bowls and chia seeds, this was about as experimental as breakfast got. Maple butter popovers rose high and proud in just 10 minutes, their golden shells hiding soft, steamy centers. The joy of cooking called them a breakfast for guests or gratitude, though they were simple enough for any day. Made from eggs, milk, and flour, the batter puffed in the heat of the oven until it formed perfect little cups. A drizzle of maple butter, just melted butter and syrup, turned them into something heavenly. They were crisp outside, airy within, and smelled like Sunday morning comfort. Served with coffee or hot tea, they disappeared almost as fast as they baked. Even decades later, their charm feels timeless. They were small triumphs of timing and patience, proof that good baking did not need hours or extravagance, only care. Every bite melted into sweetness and warmth, leaving the kitchen filled with the scent of maple and home. Pineapple and cheese canapes were the darlings of quick party food. Take a canned pineapple ring or chunk, top it with cream cheese or a cube of cheddar, and serve it cold with a toothpick. Done. Colorful, quirky, and ready in 10 minutes. These little bites showed up in tea rooms and luncheons during the 1920s, when canned fruit was becoming more common and refrigeration was still catching up. Pineapple had an exotic charm, sweet, golden, and seen as a luxury from faraway places. Paired with the saltiness of cheese, it made for a surprisingly balanced bite. These canapes were often served on crackers or toast, but more often they were just stacked and speared. Housewives clipped the recipe from magazines which called them elegant and economical. They worked just as well for guests as they did for family suppers. And while the combination sounds odd to us now, in the 1920s it was considered stylish. Simple, fast, and oddly fancy, it checked all the boxes. Buttermilk biscuits with honey butter were pure comfort wrapped in a golden, flaky bite. You could taste the love in every layer. Buttermilk was a kitchen staple back then, not something you bought in a carton, but something that came from letting milk sit a little too long. People used what they had. Biscuit dough came together quickly, especially for women who could eyeball measurements better than any cookbook. Cut with a drinking glass, baked in a hot oven, and split open to reveal soft, steaming centers, these biscuits were the kind of breakfast you made on slow mornings when there was time to breathe. Honey butter? That was just softened butter whipped with a drizzle of honey, cheap, easy, and outrageously good. The sweetness melted into those warm biscuits like syrup into pancakes. You might serve it with jam, eggs, or sausage, but the biscuit was always the star. There was something grounding about starting your day with one. It said, "We may not have much, but we are going to eat well." Sloppy Joe skillet brought a sweet tang to busy weeknights when there was barely time to sit, let alone cook. Ground beef hit the hot skillet first, sizzling as it browned while the cook stirred in chopped onions and a quick sauce of tomato paste, vinegar, brown sugar, and a shake of paprika. Within minutes, the mixture thickened into a rich, saucy filling that perfumed the kitchen with a scent both savory and slightly sweet. Soft sandwich rolls were split and warmed while the beef bubbled, ready to soak up every drop. The sloppy name came alive the moment the mixture met the bread, spilling deliciously over the sides and begging for napkins. Families loved how it stretched a small amount of meat across several sandwiches, and children delighted in the messy fun of every bite. Fast, filling, and friendly to any budget, the Sloppy Joe skillet earned its place as a dependable working man's dinner that felt like a small party at the table. Canned mushroom soup over toast was the heavy hot lunch that filled bellies fast when groceries were low and no one had time to cook. You opened a can of cream of mushroom soup, heated it on the stove, poured it over buttered toast slices, and called it done. It was quick, salty, warm, and showed up in almost every old-school cookbook as a no-fuss meal for tight grocery weeks. Families leaned on it during cold winters, rushed afternoons, or whenever the fridge looked empty but people still needed to eat. It stuck to your ribs, filled you up, and somehow made basic pantry ingredients stretch just a little further. Some folks dressed it up with black pepper, shredded cheese, or canned peas if they had them, but the plain version, soup over toast, was the classic. You would find this little meal in lunch guides, old diner menus, and those faded recipe cards passed down through families. It was simple, a little salty, and proof that even the most basic pantry staples could pull together lunch when money was tight and time was short. Fried potatoes and onion skillet was a fast, hearty stovetop meal that showed up in countless kitchens when times were tough and bellies needed filling without much fuss or money. You would slice up potatoes, chop some onions, heat a little oil or butter in the skillet, and fry everything until golden and crispy. That was it. It sounds simple now, but back when groceries were scarce and time was short, this was a meal that worked. The potatoes filled everyone up, the onions added flavor, and the skillet turned humble pantry staples into something hot, hearty, and satisfying. Some folks added eggs, bacon, or herbs if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. You would find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, tucked into grandma's cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations of families who knew how to stretch every last ingredient. Fried potatoes and onions might seem forgotten today, but back then, it was a reliable fix for hungry families trying to make groceries last, keep dinner on the table, and survive the lean weeks when every meal counted just a little more. Sardine toasts were a pantry miracle that turned the humblest can into something truly satisfying. The joy of cooking listed them among the quick meal ideas for when the cupboard looked bare, but dinner still needed dignity. Sardines were mashed with butter, lemon juice, and a little mustard until smooth, then spread generously over crisp toast or crackers. The flavor was bold and briny, the kind that lingered long after the last bite. In the 1940s and 1950s, this was considered smart cooking, high protein, low cost, and full of character. The scent filled the kitchen instantly, sea and spice together, reminding people that frugality could still taste like indulgence. Sometimes a sprinkle of paprika or parsley was added for color, but nothing fancy was needed. Each toast was a small victory of thrift and taste, a quick meal that felt worldly even when made from a single can. Chicken fried rice with canned chicken delivered a satisfying stir-fry that used pantry staples to create takeout flavor in record time. Day-old rice separated beautifully in a hot skillet coated with a thin film of oil, each grain absorbing the smoky heat. Diced onions, carrots, and peas added color and sweetness, sizzling as they released their fragrance. A can of cooked chicken provided tender meat with no extra prep, breaking apart into savory shreds that mingled with the vegetables. A quick splash of soy sauce and a sprinkle of garlic powder tied everything together, while scrambled eggs folded in at the end brought richness and body. The result was a meal that tasted carefully crafted yet came together in less than 15 minutes, perfect for evenings when energy ran low but appetites ran high. Families loved how it stretched a small amount of protein across several generous portions while clearing the fridge of leftover rice. Each spoonful offered the comfort of home and the excitement of a restaurant favorite. a reminder that great flavor does not require a long list of fresh ingredients when skill and heat meet simple planning. Apples and raisins cooked in oatmeal were the quiet heroes of 1950s breakfasts. Reliable, hearty, and far from boring once you got it right. Plain oatmeal was never going to cut it for very long, especially in families where breakfast had to do the work of 2 meals. That is where fruit came in. Diced apples and handfuls of raisins simmered with the oats, sweetening them naturally and softening just enough to melt into every bite. The apples gave it texture, the raisins gave it chew, and together they turned porridge into something you actually looked forward to. Housewives liked that it used up fruit that was past its prime, and kids liked that it was sweet enough without needing sugar on top. It was warm, filling, and forgiving. You could tweak it every day and never get bored. Some families added a pat of butter, a splash of cream, or a shake of cinnamon. Others used leftover baked apples from dessert the night before. It was a dish that felt humble but well thought out. It was also cheap, easy to prepare, and kept everyone full long enough to push lunch back a little. That alone made it a morning favorite. Tomato jelly sandwiches were not meant to be sweet. These were not breakfast jams. Tomato jelly was savory, made by boiling tomato juice with vinegar, salt, and just enough gelatin to hold its shape. It was poured into molds, chilled, and sliced like meat. Then it was layered between bread, sometimes with lettuce, sometimes with mayonnaise or cream cheese. Always served cold. The texture was curious, but the flavor was sharp and bright. Molded foods were popular in the 1920s, and gelatin was no longer a luxury. Recipes like this showed off clever presentation and stretched ingredients farther. These sandwiches were ideal for picnics and hot days when turning on the stove was not an option. Strange by today's standards, but in their time, they made perfect sense. Mayo and lettuce sandwiches were one of those simple, no-nonsense Depression-era meals that somehow filled you up when there was not much else to work with. You slapped some mayonnaise on soft sandwich bread, added a few crisp iceberg lettuce leaves, and called it lunch. That was it. It might sound plain today, but back when grocery shelves were bare and paychecks were stretched thin, this quick little meal showed up on a lot of kitchen tables. Families made do with what they had, and mayonnaise gave the sandwich some fat and flavor while lettuce added crunch and made it feel fresh. It was cheap, fast, and surprisingly satisfying when times were tough. You would see it scribbled onto old recipe cards or passed down through word of mouth as a quick lunch fix that cost next to nothing. These sandwiches are mostly forgotten now, but back then, they were a lifesaver that came together in under 10 minutes. Fish stick. Po' boy brought a taste of the Gulf Coast to busy kitchens using only what sat in the freezer. Packaged fish sticks baked or pan-fried until their coating turned golden and crunchy, while soft sandwich rolls warmed in the oven. Tartar sauce was stirred together with chopped pickles, a squeeze of lemon, and a little mustard, filling the kitchen with a tangy scent. Shredded lettuce and thin tomato slices waited on the counter, ready to add freshness and color. As soon as the fish sticks finished, they were stacked inside the rolls, drizzled with the cool sauce, and topped with the crisp vegetables. The contrast of hot, flaky fish and chilled toppings tasted like a seaside lunch, even on a weeknight far from the water. In less than 15 minutes, a handful of inexpensive ingredients became a meal that felt special, making families forget how quickly it came together. Every crunchy bite delivered the carefree feeling of a coastal vacation without leaving the house, a reminder that a freezer staple can still capture the spirit of a faraway kitchen when imagination and hunger meet. Tomato rarebit was comfort poured over toast. Imagine a smooth, cheese-rich sauce flavored with tomato, butter, and a pinch of mustard. Simple, warm, and filling. It was a cousin to Welsh rarebit, but humbler, faster, and easier to love. The joy of cooking tucked it among its light suppers, promising a full meal made in minutes. It was cooked in one pan, whisked until glossy, then ladled over slices of buttered bread or crackers. The result was creamy and tangy, with a sharpness that cut through the richness of cheese. It fit perfectly into the rhythms of everyday life, something to make after work or to stretch what was left in the icebox. Even when times were tight, this dish brought a touch of luxury to the table. The smell of tomato and melted cheese was like comfort distilled. Every bite carried the warmth of an era when simplicity was both necessity and art. Prune whip with toast soldiers sounds like something from a children's storybook, but in the 1950s, it was as real as milk bottles on the porch. Prunes were pantry royalty back then, cheap, shelf-stable, and surprisingly nutritious. Housewives would stew them down until soft, whip them with egg whites or cream to make a fluffy, pudding-like texture, and serve the result in little cups. Add toast soldiers, thin strips of buttered toast for dipping, and suddenly breakfast felt playful. This dish was especially popular for children or older folks who needed something soft, gentle, and easy to digest. But it was not just hospital food. It had charm, it had ritual, and it had a light, fruity sweetness that cut through the usual heaviness of breakfast plates. You did not need powdered sugar or cinnamon sticks. You just needed patience, a saucepan, and someone who remembered how to make it. Prune whip might be forgotten now, but back then, it was breakfast with a spoon and a little side of love. Quick codfish hash was all about speed and salt. The fish came from a wooden box, salted and dried until it could last for weeks without refrigeration. You soaked it in hot water, flaked it into a pan, and fried it with diced potatoes or onions, whatever you had. No need to get fancy. Pantry to plate in 10 minutes. Codfish had long been a staple in coastal regions, but by the 1920s it had reached inland kitchens thanks to canning and trade. It was cheap, dependable, and packed with protein, everything a working family needed. Some added milk or cream to soften the hash, but most just used bacon grease or lard to crisp it. It had a strong smell and a stronger opinion. Either you loved it or you quietly skipped it. But it filled stomachs, no matter the hour. And if you had a seasoned cast iron skillet, that golden crust could make you forget just how bare the pantry really was. Mashed banana and mayo sandwiches might sound strange to modern ears, but back in the day, this sweet and tangy sandwich was a Southern staple that showed up in plenty of lunchboxes. You mashed up a ripe banana, spread it on soft sandwich bread, and added a swipe of mayonnaise. That was it. It was quick, cheap, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this when groceries were scarce and meals had to stretch. The banana added sweetness, the mayo gave it creaminess, and together they turned plain bread into a fast, satisfying lunch. You would find this sandwich scribbled in old community cookbooks, passed down at church picnics, or tucked into handwritten recipe boxes that lived in kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of folks growing up during hard times, this odd little sandwich was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight and hunger was knocking. Cornbread pancakes with applesauce were the sweet, savory shortcut lunch you could pull together when the pantry looked bare, but you still wanted something warm. You grabbed a box of Jiffy cornbread mix, stirred in some water or milk, dropped spoonfuls into a hot skillet, and fried up little golden pancakes. They were crisp around the edges, soft in the center, and ready in minutes. Most folks topped them with a dollop of cold applesauce straight from the jar for that sweet, salty combination everyone quietly loved. It was a weird mix, but it worked, especially when groceries were low and creativity was high. Old-school lunch menus listed these because they were filling, fast, and cheap, making them a favorite for busy parents or frugal school cafeterias. You could dress them up with honey or butter, but the classic stayed simple. Cornbread cakes with a scoop of applesauce, ready in 10 minutes flat. It was comfort food that took little effort and brought just enough sweetness to brighten a rough day. Cottage pudding with hot lemon sauce was the dessert that made any meal feel complete, no matter how simple the dinner that came before it. Despite its name, it was not pudding at all but a soft, buttery cake, light, fragrant, and ready to soak up every drop of syrup poured over it. The joy of cooking praised it as speedy comfort, something that could be mixed and baked in the time it took coffee to brew. Flour, milk, sugar, and butter came together in one bowl, transforming pantry staples into something worthy of company. The hot lemon sauce was what made it sing, a bright, golden syrup that cut through the sweetness like sunlight after rain. Served straight from the oven, steam curling up through the sauce, it filled kitchens with the scent of home. It was the dessert for long evenings, for Sunday suppers, or for quiet nights when a family needed something kind. Its beauty lay in its modesty. No frosting, no decoration, just truth and flavor. Every spoonful felt like gratitude made edible, a reminder that joy was often simple, quick, and within reach. Hot buttered toast with cinnamon sugar was the unofficial breakfast of rushed mornings and picky eaters. No one had time to cook a full spread every day, and this sweet little trick turned plain white bread into something magical in under 5 minutes. You would toast a slice or two, spread on real butter while it was still hot, and then sprinkle a mix of cinnamon and sugar right on top. The butter would melt down, the cinnamon would sink in, and suddenly you had a breakfast that felt cozy and a little indulgent. No mess, no complaints, and no leftovers. This was one of those treats that kids never got tired of, and let's be honest, neither did adults. Some families even kept a shaker of cinnamon sugar pre-mixed and ready to go. You would find it next to the salt and pepper, like it belonged there. For all its simplicity, this toast had charm. It was quick, warm, and had a way of making even a gloomy morning a little brighter. Cold ham and apple stacks were a favorite for busy afternoons and picnic baskets. Thin slices of cooked ham were layered with crisp apple slices, each one brushed lightly with mustard or a touch of honey. Stacked together on a plate or between slices of bread, it was refreshing, a little sweet, and a lot more satisfying than it looked. The apples gave crunch and tartness, while the ham brought salt and richness. No stove was needed, no prep beyond a knife and cutting board, and it came together in minutes. This dish became popular in the 1920s when home refrigeration was limited and quick, cold meals were prized. Ham could be cooked ahead or bought from the local butcher in thin, ready-to-serve sheets. Apples were available most of the year and kept well even without refrigeration. The mustard tied it all together, balancing the flavors without overpowering the freshness. This was lunch you could make in 5 minutes flat, eat with your hands, and still feel like you had something special. Stacked or plated, it made a simple meal feel just a little bit more thoughtful. Cinnamon cream toast was breakfast wrapped in nostalgia, a dish that whispered rather than announced itself. Bread toasted to gold, spread thick with butter, and sprinkled with cinnamon sugar until it shimmered like amber. The joy of cooking called it a child's delight, a recipe that belonged to mornings when the world still felt kind. A quick pour of warm milk or cream softened the crust just enough to turn it into something between a pudding and a toast. It was sweet without excess, soft without losing shape, a balance that comforted quietly. The scent of cinnamon filled the air, blending with coffee and early sunlight. Mothers made it when there wasn't time for pancakes, but love still had to be shown. The milk pooled at the edges, the sugar crystallized on top, and the first bite melted like a promise of warmth. It was food that asked nothing but presence, reminding families that care could fit into a few minutes before the day began. Cinnamon cream toast slowed time, even in the busiest homes, turning 10 simple minutes into a memory worth keeping. Creamed peas on toast turned a bag of frozen peas and a little flour into a fast dinner that warmed the evening. Butter melted in a skillet while a spoonful of flour was whisked in to make a smooth roux. Then milk streamed in to form a creamy sauce. The peas went straight from freezer to pan, bright green against the pale gravy as they softened and released their sweetness. Thick slices of bread toasted in the same pan or under a quick broiler became the foundation, soaking up the sauce while staying crisp at the edges. A sprinkle of black pepper and a pinch of nutmeg gave the dish surprising depth, proof that simple pantry ingredients could still feel indulgent. Families loved how it filled plates in less than 10 minutes and cost almost nothing, making it a dependable weeknight standby. Children liked the mild flavor and the fun of cutting through the soft bread with a fork, while adults found comfort in its quiet, creamy richness. One bite carried the memory of suppers built on thrift and ingenuity, a reminder that speed and satisfaction can share the same plate when time and money are scarce, but hunger is real. Cold macaroni ring mold with tuna was the kind of no-cook lunch you either loved or never wanted to see again, but back in the day, it was everywhere. You cooked elbow macaroni ahead of time, chilled it, then mixed in canned tuna, mayo, and peas, pouring the whole thing into a gelatin mold. After a quick trip to the fridge, it came out shaped like a perfect ring, ready for slicing. It sounds a little strange, but in church luncheons, potlucks, and quick summer meals, this was considered fancy and practical. Moms loved it because there was no cooking when the house was already boiling hot, and the ingredients were cheap pantry staples. The gelatin molds made it look like more effort went into lunch than actually did. You sliced off a wedge, maybe threw a little lettuce or parsley on the plate, and that was it. Lunch was ready, cold, filling, and good enough to impress the neighbors. It might not win over modern taste buds, but back then, this molded tuna salad was the fast-track ticket to a retro lunch that felt special when time was short. Applesauce and cottage cheese bowls were one of those sweet, simple meals that came together in minutes, filling the gap between breakfast, lunch, or even dessert when there was not much to spare in the pantry. You would scoop a generous helping of cottage cheese into a bowl, spoon cool applesauce over the top, and maybe add a little cinnamon if you had some lying around. That was all there was to it. It sounds plain now, but back when groceries were scarce and money had to stretch, this quick little bowl was a lifesaver. It was light, cool, sweet, and packed with enough protein to hold you over during busy days. In the 1960s, families leaned on easy meals like this to keep things running, especially when both time and ingredients were in short supply. You would find this simple recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, shared between neighbors, or tucked into handwritten kitchen notes passed down through the years. Some folks dressed it up with fruit or nuts if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. It might be forgotten today, but applesauce and cottage cheese bowls kept plenty of households fed, happy, and full with little more than 2 everyday staples. Macaroni with butter and black pepper offered pure comfort with almost no effort, turning a handful of pantry staples into a bowl of creamy warmth. Elbow macaroni boiled quickly in salted water while butter melted in a waiting pot. The drained pasta was tossed directly into the melted butter, and a heavy shower of freshly ground black pepper coated each piece, releasing a fragrant spice that filled the room. A small scoop of grated Parmesan, if available, added a gentle richness, but even without it, the dish delivered deep satisfaction. Ready in less than 15 minutes, it soothed the end of a long day with its silky texture and simple flavor. Children loved the mild, buttery taste, while adults appreciated the subtle heat of the pepper and the reminder that good food does not always demand a complex recipe. This humble meal has endured for generations because it proves that speed, thrift, and pleasure can happily share the same pot when hunger calls for something immediate and comforting. Applesauce spice cake in a skillet was the taste of comfort baked fast enough to keep up with a post-war kitchen. Housewives mixed it right in the pan: flour, sugar, applesauce, cinnamon, and a spoon of shortening. No separate bowl needed, no fuss to clean. In 10 minutes, it filled the air with the scent of spice and home. The batter rose into a tender golden cake that stayed moist from the applesauce itself, a trick every busy cook knew by heart. It was a recipe for a family that worked hard, loved deeply, and had little time to spare. The joy of cooking praised it as good economy, but those who made it knew it was more than that. It was gratitude, baked warm and fast. Served with a dollop of whipped cream or eaten straight from the skillet, it disappeared before it cooled. Every bite carried cinnamon and comfort, proof that even the simplest sweets could hold a family together at the end of a long day. The applesauce spice cake reminded a generation that ease and care could live side by side, all in one humble skillet. Tomato juice and toast was the kind of no-nonsense breakfast that defined health trends in the 1950s. Back then, juice was not just a side beverage, it was a prescribed part of a balanced meal, often recommended in school pamphlets and nutrition guides. You would pour yourself a glass of bright red tomato juice, maybe chilled, maybe room temperature, and pair it with a slice or two of buttered toast. That was it. And somehow, it was enough. Housewives liked that it was quick, inexpensive, and vitamin-packed. Doctors liked that it kept people full without weighing them down. Kids, well, they tolerated it. But there was something oddly satisfying about the saltiness of the juice and the crunch of warm bread. It was clean, simple, and comforting in a way that only post-war optimism could make possible. Not everyone remembers this combo fondly, but it had staying power for a reason. Sometimes breakfast was not about indulgence. Sometimes it was just about starting the day off right, with something honest. Boiled lettuce and butter might raise eyebrows now, but back in the 1920s, it was a surprisingly common side. You took whole leaves or halved heads of lettuce, dropped them into boiling water just until tender, then drained and dressed them with melted butter and salt. That was it. The lettuce wilted slightly, taking on a silky texture that felt oddly luxurious for such a simple dish. It was often served with eggs, potatoes, or fish, giving just enough greens to round out a meal without needing a full salad. This was especially handy when the lettuce was on its last legs, limp or bitter, but still usable. Rather than throw it away, home cooks gave it one last act of service. Boiled lettuce absorbed flavor fast and cost practically nothing to prepare. You could cook and serve it in under 10 minutes, using a single pot and whatever seasoning you had on hand. Though modern diners might flinch at the idea, families back then saw it as practical and even refined. Butter made everything better, and for many households, this soft green side was a quiet staple. Maple glazed carrots with parsley were the quiet showstoppers of Joy's Vegetables in a Hurry, a recipe that turned an everyday root into something worthy of company. Peeled and sliced carrots simmered quickly in butter, maple syrup, and a pinch of salt until tender, glossy, and golden. The joy of cooking described them as bright with flavor and charm, the kind of side dish that proved care didn't need hours to show. In 10 minutes, they transformed from plain to polished, dressed in amber glaze and flecked with fresh parsley. Their sweetness balanced roasted meats while their color, vivid orange with green, lit up the table like stained glass in sunlight. The scent of maple filled the kitchen, rich but comforting, warm but never heavy. This was food that didn't need to speak loudly to be loved. Each bite was a blend of soft earthiness and bright sweetness, a small act of beauty on a plate. Even in modest kitchens, maple glazed carrots gave ordinary dinners a touch of celebration. They reminded cooks that love wasn't measured in difficulty, but in attention, and that the best moments often came from the simplest pots. Fried bologna, sandwich with mustard, brought quick satisfaction to tired working families who needed a hot dinner without fuss. Thick slices of bologna were scored so they curled as they hit a sizzling cast iron skillet, filling the kitchen with a smoky aroma that signaled something good was minutes away. While the bologna browned, slices of white bread were lightly toasted and brushed with butter for extra flavor. A generous swipe of yellow mustard added tang, and some cooks layered in thin slices of onion or a single leaf of crisp lettuce if they had it. The heat from the skillet gave the meat a crisp edge and a savory depth that transformed a humble cold cut into a hearty main course. Children loved the salty, slightly sweet taste and the way the sandwich stayed warm as they carried it to the table. Parents loved that dinner was ready before the evening news began. It was fast, filling, and cheap. Everything a working household needed at the end of a long day. Even today, one bite of that hot sandwich can summon memories of late nights, hard work, and the comfort of a meal that respected both time and appetite. Peanut butter and sweet pickle sandwiches were one of those strange combinations that somehow became a regular part of vintage kitchen routines. You spread creamy peanut butter on soft sandwich bread, added sliced sweet pickles, and pressed it together. That was it. Quick, crunchy, and a little tangy with just enough sweetness to balance it out. It sounds odd now, but back then, it was a favorite for busy lunches, quick after-school snacks, or when there was not much else in the pantry. The peanut butter gave it richness, the pickles added bite, and together they made a sandwich that stuck to your ribs and kept you going. You would find this one scribbled in old recipe boxes passed around at church picnics or quietly tucked into Grandma's cookbook among the other quirky 10-minute meals. Families leaned on this recipe because it came together fast, filled you up, and used ingredients most people always had on hand. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of households back then, peanut butter and sweet pickle sandwiches were a surprising lifesaver when time and money were both running short. Cornbread and pinto beans bowl turned leftover staples into a 10-minute dinner that warmed both stomach and spirit. Cold cornbread from the previous night was crumbled into wide bowls while a pot of pre-cooked pinto beans reheated on the stove with a splash of water and a pinch of chili powder. As the beans bubbled, their smoky scent filled the air, carrying memories of long simmering meals that once took hours. The hot beans were ladled over the cornbread, their broth soaking into every crumb until the bowl became a soft, savory stew. A drizzle of hot sauce or a spoonful of chopped onions added brightness, though many enjoyed it plain, letting the natural flavor of the beans and the sweet cornmeal shine. It was a dish of pure practicality, stretching yesterday's work into today's dinner without a single complaint. Quick to prepare and impossible to tire of, this simple bowl proved that good food is often nothing more than humble ingredients handled with care and eaten with gratitude. Buttered radishes on rye were elegance disguised as ease, a dish that thrived on freshness, restraint, and balance. Thin slices of bright radish were layered across thickly spread butter on hearty rye bread, then sprinkled with salt until they glistened like jewels. The joy of cooking praised their clean, sharp flavor, calling them the perfect quick bite for teas, luncheons, or afternoon gatherings. They were crisp, peppery, and soothing all at once, a perfect contrast of bite and cream. The dish took minutes to make, yet carried the quiet poise of something far more refined. Shredded wheat with warm cream and sugar was comfort in a bowl, no matter how old you were. This was not the dry, tasteless cereal you might imagine. It was big, hearty biscuits of wheat that got softened with a pour of warm milk or cream, then sweetened with a spoonful of sugar or honey. It was slow food, the kind of breakfast you ate sitting down with steam rising from the bowl and maybe the morning paper nearby. Parents trusted it because it was filling, nutritious, and simple. No colors, no cartoon mascots, just real food. For kids, it became a ritual, something tied to winter mornings and wool socks and the smell of toast in the air. The soft texture made it feel like porridge, but with a little more body. It stuck with you in the best way. And if you were lucky, there might be a second helping waiting at the bottom of the pot. Shredded carrot and raisin salad was a bright little bowl of sunshine on a plate. You took raw carrots, grated them fine, and tossed them with plump raisins and a light dressing made from vinegar or lemon juice, sometimes with a bit of sugar or honey. That was it. Served chilled or room temperature, it was crunchy, sweet, and just a little tangy, an easy contrast to heavier dishes. It showed up in women's magazines, potluck tables, and school lunches alike. Housewives liked it because it was fast and healthy. Kids liked it because it was sweet enough to eat without complaint. Carrots were cheap, kept well, and were available most of the year. Raisins added natural sugar and needed no refrigeration. Together, they made a salad that was ready in under 10 minutes with nothing more than a bowl and a fork. No boiling, no baking, just clean, simple prep and a whole lot of color. In a decade obsessed with molded salads and gelatin towers, this one kept things grounded and tasty. It was a quick win in kitchens that needed a little brightness fast. Stewed tomatoes and toast was pure pantry magic. A can of tomatoes went into a saucepan with a little butter, some salt, and maybe a chopped onion if you had one. You let it simmer just long enough for the juices to thicken slightly, then spooned it hot over slices of buttered toast. It was warm, savory, and slightly tangy, somewhere between soup and supper. The toast soaked up the tomato juices, turning soft around the edges but still crisp in the middle. This dish came together in under 10 minutes and filled a surprising amount of stomach for how little it took to make. Brown butter noodles with parsley turned the simplest ingredients into a dish worth slowing down for, a quiet ritual of care disguised as speed. The joy of cooking listed it under plain cookery, but anyone who made it knew how far from plain it truly was. Butter melted slowly in a skillet, turning from gold to amber, filling the kitchen with that nutty, toasted scent that could calm a weary day. The noodles, soft but sturdy, were tossed with the browned butter until they glistened like satin. A handful of chopped parsley followed, adding freshness and color, while salt and pepper finished the balance. In less than 10 minutes, a humble bowl became something that felt both grounding and indulgent. It was food for moments when silence and flavor spoke louder than words. Served alone or beside roasted vegetables, it fit every mood and season. The taste lingered long after the bowl was empty, buttery and fragrant. Brown butter noodles proved that patience, even for a few minutes, could transform the ordinary into something close to grace. Texas chili dog plate made a hearty, messy dinner that satisfied every craving after a long workday. Hot dogs sizzled in a skillet while a can of chili warmed on the stove with a spoonful of cumin and smoked paprika to deepen the flavor. Soft buns were split and toasted lightly, ready to hold the hot dogs as soon as they browned. The steaming chili was spooned generously over each dog, followed by shredded cheddar and a scatter of diced onions for bite. The smell of spice and smoke filled the kitchen, drawing everyone to the table before the last dog was dressed. Each plate was a cheerful mess, requiring extra napkins and rewarding every bite with a mix of textures and flavors. It was inexpensive, quick and filling, perfect for nights when there was little time but big appetites. The combination of tender bun, juicy sausage, and rich chili sauce made this simple dish a lasting favorite in households that valued both speed and flavor. Fried bologna and mustard sandwich was a 10-minute fix that never pretended to be fancy, but always hit the spot. You tossed a slice of bologna into a hot pan, let it sizzle until the edges curled, slapped it onto soft bread, and added mustard. That was it. Simple, quick, and surprisingly satisfying. Back in Grandma's day, this showed up when money was tight, groceries were low, or you just needed something fast before heading back to work or school. It was salty, smoky, and the bologna crisped up just enough to feel like real cooking. Kids loved it, adults leaned on it, and every household had their own little spin on the recipe. Some added cheese, some toasted the bread, but most kept it plain and practical. You would not find this in glossy magazines, but you would find it tucked in those old handwritten cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next. Another quick forgotten gem from a time when meals had to be fast, filling, and affordable. Fried bologna with mustard on toast was the quick stovetop lunch that somehow managed to taste better than it had any right to. You sliced bologna, tossed it in a hot pan, watched it curl up at the edges, and slapped it on toasted bread with a smear of yellow mustard. That was it. Lunch in under 10 minutes. It was salty, tangy, crispy around the edges, and showed up everywhere from lunch counters to kitchen tables when the grocery list was running short. Bologna was cheap, lasted forever in the fridge, and frying it gave it just enough of a glow-up to make it feel like more than sandwich meat. Some folks added a slice of cheese or swapped in rye bread, but the classic stayed simple and fast. Fried bologna with mustard was not glamorous, but it hit the spot when you needed something filling, salty, and satisfying without much effort. It was a staple in school lunchrooms, factory break rooms, and busy homes, sticking around because it was affordable, reliable, and always ready when the clock was ticking. Hot milk cake. Slices with butter were a quick, sweet fix that turned leftover dessert into a satisfying breakfast or afternoon snack with hardly any effort. You sliced up leftover hot milk cake, toasted it gently or warmed it up, and slathered it with butter. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had a rich, soft, slightly sweet bite that kept everyone happy when groceries were tight and meals had to stretch. It sounds simple, but back then, this little treat was a kitchen staple, especially in homes that believed nothing should go to waste. The hot milk cake gave it sweetness, the butter added richness, and together they turned leftovers into something new and satisfying. You would find this recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down through generations, or quietly shared between neighbors looking for ways to make every crumb count. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, hot milk cake slices with butter were a warm, comforting reminder that even the smallest leftovers could be turned into something worth savoring. Ham and cheese biscuit sandwiches turned leftovers into a satisfying handheld meal that tasted like a weekend treat even on the busiest night. Flaky biscuits baked from a can or quickly mixed from scratch rose high in the oven while slices of baked ham warmed in a skillet. As soon as the biscuits were golden, they were split open and layered with the savory ham and slices of sharp cheddar or mild American cheese. A few minutes back in the warm oven melted the cheese into a gooey blanket that glued everything together. The salty ham, buttery biscuit, and rich cheese made a perfect combination that required no side dish and no long wait. For families coming home late, this sandwich was both supper and comfort, a way to turn yesterday's roast into tonight's fast feast. Children grabbed them hot from the tray, and the memory of that warm bite remains an echo of efficiency and home-style pleasure. Creamed mushrooms on crackers was the kind of dish that came together faster than guests could arrive, the perfect mix of grace and resourcefulness. A few spoonfuls of butter melted in a pan, a dusting of flour turned it thick, and milk smoothed it into something velvety. Sliced mushrooms followed, softening as they released their earthy aroma. The sauce simmered just long enough to turn glossy before being spooned over crisp crackers or buttered toast. In the 1940s and 1950s, this was elegant entertaining, simple ingredients dressed in charm. The joy of cooking called it a supper in miniature, perfect for evenings when friends dropped by unannounced. Housewives loved it because it looked refined yet cost little, using what was already in the pantry. The flavor balanced richness and simplicity, each bite creamy with a hint of woodland flavor. Served with martinis or lemonade, it fit every occasion. Creamed mushrooms on crackers reminded cooks that true hospitality was never about extravagance. It was about warmth, speed, and heart. Ketchup noodle curls were the kind of thing that made no sense on paper, but made perfect sense in a hungry kitchen. You took whatever noodles you had, elbow macaroni, spaghetti, broken up ramen, boiled them soft, tossed them in a pat of butter, and then squeezed on a generous swirl of ketchup. That was it. Dinner or lunch, or maybe even breakfast, depending on how tight things were. It was the ultimate back pocket recipe, born from the kind of pantry that always had just enough but never more. Some added a sprinkle of cheese if they had it, others went wild and cracked in an egg. But most just kept it plain and honest. It was the dish you made when time ran out and money did too. If you have never had ketchup noodles before, do not knock it until you try it. And if you thought that was scrappy, just wait until you see what happens when fried rice meets the humble lunch meat hero of the pantry. Ritz cracker, meatless loaf slices were the post-war solution to a missing protein and a shrinking grocery budget. With meat rationed or just plain too expensive, people turned to the humble cracker as a substitute base for something hearty. You started by crushing Ritz crackers into crumbs. Fine, buttery crumbs that practically melted in your fingers. Then you added milk, egg, and seasoning. Onion powder, garlic salt, maybe a bit of parsley if you had it. Mix it all together until it held its shape. Press it into a loaf pan, or shape it into patties and fry it in a pan until golden brown on both sides. What came out was something between a croquette and a breakfast sausage patty, crispy on the outside, soft and savory in the middle. You could eat it plain, serve it with gravy, or sandwich it between two slices of toast. It was cheap, clever, and comforting. But if you are looking for a meatless meal that looks as wild as it sounds, just wait until we serve you cheese and pineapple in a lettuce cup. Banana fritters dusted with powdered sugar were a breakfast treat that made even an ordinary Tuesday morning feel like a celebration. Bananas were one of the few fruits you could count on to be affordable, especially as trade routes opened back up after the war. Housewives figured out quickly that a ripe banana could stretch a batter and give it flavor, texture, and sweetness all at once. The fritters themselves were little rounds or drops of banana-laced dough, fried in a shallow pan and dusted while still hot with a shake of powdered sugar. Crispy outside, soft and warm inside, like breakfast donuts without the weight. They were golden brown, slightly caramelized, and just messy enough to make kids grin from ear to ear. Some people added a pinch of nutmeg or a splash of vanilla, but the basic version did just fine. You could make a whole plate in under 20 minutes with pantry staples and 2 overripe bananas. Banana fritters were the kind of thing that turned leftovers into joy. That made them a classic. Quick cinnamon toast fingers were little slivers of joy, ready in less time than it took to set the table. You started with plain white bread, sliced into narrow strips and toasted until crisp. Then came a smear of butter and a generous sprinkle of cinnamon mixed with sugar. Warm, fragrant, and exactly what a tired afternoon called for. These were not just for breakfast. They showed up with hot tea, cocoa, or milk, passed around to kids playing on the porch or guests who popped in unexpectedly. The smell alone was enough to make a house feel warmer. And in a decade where ovens were temperamental and time was precious, this was one of the easiest sweets you could make without baking. Cinnamon was affordable and kept well in pantry tins. Bread was always around, and butter, if you had it, was used with care. The result was golden and crisp, with just enough sweetness to turn a slice of toast into something memorable. These fingers were usually served on little saucers or napkins, and somehow they always disappeared before anyone realized the plate had been full. Stuffed celery with pimento cheese was color and comfort, disguised as party food. Celery sticks, washed crisp and cut into neat lengths, became little boats for smooth orange filling made from grated cheese, pimentos, and a dash of paprika. The joy of cooking placed it in the 10-minute appetizers section, right beside olives and deviled eggs, calling it cheerful and quick. On the plate, it looked like sunshine and freshness, bright green, vivid red, and gold. It was served at church teas, bridge clubs, and holiday dinners, balancing crunchy and creamy in each bite. No one needed a knife or fork. It was food meant to be picked up, tasted, and enjoyed in passing conversation. The pimento cheese gave a southern warmth to an otherwise northern snack, turning simplicity into a small moment of pride. For many, it was the first dish a child learned to make for guests. Every family had its own version. Some added mayonnaise, others mustard, but all agreed on one truth: it vanished fast. Stuffed celery with pimento cheese was joy in its purest form, proof that color could feed the spirit as much as the stomach. Salisbury steak patties with gravy mix offered a hearty plate in minutes, transforming ground beef into something that tasted like a slow Sunday supper. Lean beef was seasoned with onion powder, garlic, and a splash of Worcestershire, then shaped into oval patties and seared in a skillet until crisp on the outside and juicy inside. While the meat browned, a packet of instant brown gravy whisked together with water created a smooth sauce in a separate pan. Once the patties were done, they were nestled into the bubbling gravy for a final simmer that coated them in rich flavor. Served over mashed potatoes or buttered toast, the meal felt far more elaborate than the clock revealed. Working parents loved the speed and the hearty comfort, while children scooped up every drop of gravy with the last crust of bread. It was a dinner that turned a simple pound of beef into something warm, filling, and memorable, the kind of dish that proves convenience and care can live on the same plate. Sardine and onion sandwiches were one of those quick, no-frills meals that filled hungry workers up fast and showed up in plenty of lunch pails across America. You opened a tin of sardines, laid them on rye bread, added some raw onion slices, and that was it. Simple, salty, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might sound harsh now, but back when protein was hard to come by and groceries were scarce, this was a go-to meal. The sardines gave you the protein, the onions added bite, and the rye bread kept you full. You would find this sandwich scribbled into old cookbooks, passed around among factory workers, or tucked into lunch boxes for folks heading out the door. It was never fancy, but it worked. Today, most people have forgotten how handy meals like this were, but back then, sardine and onion sandwiches helped plenty of families stretch what little they had and stay full through long, hard days. Cabbage and sausage fry-up offered big flavor and a full stomach with almost no preparation. Pre-cooked sausage slices hit the skillet first, releasing fat and spice that would season everything to come. Thin shreds of green cabbage followed, sizzling as they met the hot pan and softening into tender ribbons that soaked up the sausage drippings. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of red pepper flakes brightened the dish, while a quick toss brought everything together in less than 10 minutes. The combination of smoky meat and sweet cabbage made each bite taste richer than its humble ingredients suggested. Served alone or with a slice of bread, it filled plates and satisfied appetites without straining the grocery budget. Working families valued the ease, but they also loved the hearty, old-world flavor that reminded them of meals once cooked slowly, now captured in minutes. Cinnamon Swirl Coffee Bread was a loaf that made weekday mornings feel a little bit like Sunday. Sweet, soft, and laced with a ribbon of cinnamon sugar through the middle, this bread was made ahead of time and sliced as needed, if it lasted that long. Housewives loved it because it made enough to serve a crowd or stash in the freezer, and kids loved it because it tasted like dessert but passed as breakfast. It was yeasty, tender, and just the right amount of indulgent. Most versions were baked in loaf pans, sliced thick, and served with a pat of butter or a cup of coffee on the side. You might toast it, you might not, but either way, it always felt like a treat. The swirl inside was never perfect, which made each slice a little different and somehow even better. It was the kind of breakfast that brought people to the table without needing to be asked twice. Canned peach and cottage cheese plates were a favorite of hot afternoons and light appetites. You took canned peach halves, sweet, syrupy, and already soft, and placed a scoop of cottage cheese in the center where the pit used to be. That was it. Some people added a sprig of mint or a dash of paprika on top for flair, but the basic version needed no embellishment. This dish was chilled, fast, and surprisingly balanced. The fruit gave you sugar and brightness. The cottage cheese gave you protein and creaminess. And together, they made a 10-minute meal that looked more elegant than it had any right to. These plates were common at luncheons and supper clubs, but also at everyday tables across the country. It was a way to use preserved fruit that felt fresh, and it worked especially well when kitchens were too hot to cook. In an era when people were just starting to understand the value of lighter meals and balanced diets, dishes like this led the way. And all it took was a can opener and a spoon. Grape jelly meatball skillet might sound like a strange mix now, but back then, it was one of those quirky, sweet, and savory meals that showed up fast and stretched what little meat you had. You browned some mini meatballs in a skillet, poured in grape jelly and a splash of mustard, and let it all bubble together. In 10 minutes flat, dinner was ready. It was sweet, tangy, salty, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this because they turned a small amount of ground beef into a meal that felt bigger than it was. You could find this in old church cookbooks, clipped from women's magazines, or scribbled onto recipe cards tucked in drawers. It was not about fancy ingredients. It was about getting something warm, satisfying, and a little fun onto the table, fast. Today it feels forgotten, but back then, this sweet skillet meal kept homes running during the toughest weeks. Baked bean toasties were the humble, hot lunches that turned pantry staples into something warm and satisfying in under 10 minutes. You grabbed a can of baked beans, spooned them over slices of soft white bread, sprinkled on shredded cheddar, and stuck the whole thing under the broiler. The cheese melted, the beans bubbled, and suddenly you had a lunch that felt filling and hearty without needing much effort. This quick meal showed up in old cookbooks, school cafeterias, and busy households when money was tight and grocery runs had not happened yet. It was the kind of food that stretched your budget, filled you up fast, and still tasted good, especially on a cold day when all you wanted was something warm and cheesy. Some folks added hot sauce or chopped onions, but the plain version stayed the classic. Baked bean toasties may not have won style points, but they worked, turning basic ingredients into lunch in record time. Cottage cheese pancakes were the forgotten fitness favorite of the 1970s. High in protein, light in texture, and ready in minutes. Cottage cheese, eggs, and a spoonful of flour made the batter. A hot pan did the rest. They cooked fast, puffing slightly around the edges, golden on both sides. The joy of cooking promoted them as part of a modern health breakfast, long before protein was a buzzword. Their flavor was mild but rich, tangy from the cheese and soft like soufflé inside. Served with fruit, honey, or jam, they felt both wholesome and indulgent. They became a favorite of busy parents and early risers who wanted real food without the fuss. Each pancake was proof that nourishment could be effortless. The smell of them frying, warm, milky, slightly sweet, could make any morning softer. Today, few remember how simple they were to make, but once, they were the breakfast that promised a better day. Creamed cornmeal mush was what happened when you took one of the humblest foods around and gave it a second life on the skillet. Originally born out of necessity during the Great Depression, it never quite left American kitchens. You would cook cornmeal slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a porridge, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it chill overnight. The next morning, you would slice it into thick slabs, pan-fry them until golden, and drizzle on syrup or melted butter. Some folks even added a sprinkle of salt for balance, or cinnamon when sugar was tight. It was a breakfast that felt like a little bit of effort went a long way. Housewives liked it because it was cheap, filling, and made use of leftovers without waste. Kids liked it because it was crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and tasted like something sweet without being too heavy. No one called it gourmet, but everyone knew it worked. Cornmeal mush was honest food. No frills, no fuss, just something hot and good that stuck to your ribs. Cracker mush might not sound glamorous, but for many families it was exactly what they needed. You crushed up a handful of saltine crackers, nothing fancy, just the basics, and simmered them gently in milk with a little salt. The mixture thickened in minutes into something warm, soft, and soothing, somewhere between porridge and pudding. It was often served to small children, elderly relatives, or anyone recovering from illness, but it also stood in as a quick dinner when groceries were running thin. The beauty of cracker mush was its adaptability. Some added sugar or cinnamon for a sweet twist, others stirred in bits of cheese or onion for something savory. It cooked in 5 to 7 minutes flat, needed just one pot, and came from ingredients every kitchen kept on hand. During the 1920s, when refrigeration was limited and waste was not an option, cracker mush was a way to make every crumb count. It might not be a showstopper, but it was dependable, comforting, and easy to love. Sometimes the most forgettable dishes are the ones that carried people through the hardest times. Baked bean toasties were the kind of quick, hearty meal you could throw together with just a few ingredients and still feel like you had something warm and filling on the table. You toasted up some sandwich bread, heated a can of baked beans, and spooned them over the top with a sprinkle of shredded cheddar if you had it. It sounds basic, but when you were short on groceries and stretched for time, this meal worked wonders. The beans were filling, the toast added crunch, and the cheese made it all feel a little more special. You would see this simple meal show up in New England kitchens, packed into lunchboxes, or scribbled into old cookbooks full of fast, affordable recipes. It was not about being fancy. It was about getting something hot and satisfying on the table in under 10 minutes. Today, people might forget how handy meals like this were, but back then, baked bean toasties filled a lot of hungry bellies without breaking the bank. Patty melt on rye delivered diner flavor in a fraction of the time, making it a favorite among families who craved something special after a long shift. Ground beef was quickly shaped into thin patties and pressed flat on a hot griddle until sizzling and browned. Meanwhile, onions sliced paper-thin softened in butter until golden and sweet, their aroma drifting through the kitchen. Slices of rye bread were spread with more butter, then layered with the beef, the onions, and generous slices of melty Swiss or American cheese. A few minutes back on the skillet brought everything together, the bread crisping as the cheese oozed around the edges. The result was a sandwich that tasted like a full diner meal, yet came together faster than any takeout order. Served with pickles or a handful of chips, the patty melt satisfied both hunger and the need for something comforting, proving that a fast dinner could still feel like a small luxury at the end of a demanding day. Cold chicken and mayonnaise roll-ups were the leftover lunch you barely had to think about, but still managed to feel like a proper meal. You shredded leftover chicken, stirred in mayo, maybe a little salt or pepper, and spread it onto soft white bread slices. Then you rolled them up tight, sliced them into little spirals if you wanted to be fancy, and lunch was ready in minutes. Some folks added celery sticks or pickles on the side, but most kept it plain. just cold chicken, bread, and mayo doing the heavy lifting. This quick lunch showed up everywhere from family picnics to old-school lunchboxes because it made use of leftovers, took no time, and filled you up fast. It may not have been flashy, but for busy days and bare cupboards, these little roll-ups worked better than most would guess. Baked apples with cinnamon sugar were the heartwarming dessert that proved simplicity never went out of style. A 10-minute wonder that felt like hours of care. Core the apples, fill the hollow with brown sugar, cinnamon, and a pat of butter, then bake until the skin turned glossy and the filling bubbled over like molten caramel. The scent filled every corner of the house, sweet, spiced, and soft, like the comfort of wool blankets and laughter at the table. The apples collapsed slightly, their texture turning tender but not mushy, the syrup pooling at the bottom of the dish. The joy of cooking listed it among quick sweets, meant for nights when time was short, but the craving for kindness lingered. Served warm with cream, whipped topping, or ice cream, it felt indulgent without excess. Each bite carried the warmth of memory, the flavor of home, and the calm of something perfectly ordinary done perfectly well. Ham and potato hash with fried egg was the kind of breakfast that used every last scrap in your fridge and turned it into something that tasted like a Sunday morning. Leftover ham was never wasted. You would cube it up, fry it with diced potatoes, maybe a chopped onion if you had one, and finish it all off with a sizzling egg on top. This was a skillet meal, the kind that filled the whole kitchen with the sound of oil popping and the smell of something good. Housewives loved it because it was fast and filling. Husbands loved it because it was hot and hearty. Kids loved it because, well, fried potatoes and egg yolks are hard to beat. No one called it hash to be trendy. It was just the term for everything you had left, cooked right. And when the egg yolk broke over those crispy potatoes, you would swear you were at a diner instead of a Formica table with chipped salt shakers. Sometimes the best breakfasts come from what you almost threw away. Celery stuffed with Roquefort or peanut butter was a timeless plate filler. Whether for guests or just yourself, this dish kept showing up in 1920s kitchens. You cleaned the celery, cut it into ribs, and smeared it with a filling. Roquefort if you were fancy, peanut butter if you were not. That was it. No stove, no oven. Crunchy, creamy, cold, and ready in minutes. Hostesses used it to pat out trays, and families loved how fast it came together. The cheese brought salt and tang, the peanut butter brought protein. Either way, it hit the spot. The dish was easy to scale, make 5 or 50. In an era full of molded salads and layered desserts, celery sticks like these kept things simple. They added texture, color, and something to chew on without costing much. Quick, tidy, and strangely satisfying, they earned their place at every table. Canned chili over saltines was the kind of quick meal that got dinner on the table fast with hardly any effort, especially when the cupboards were running bare. You opened a can of chili, heated it on the stove, and spooned it over a pile of saltine crackers. That was all there was to it. It might sound plain now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries were stretched thin, this quick, salty, filling meal showed up on plenty of kitchen tables. The saltines soaked up the chili, adding crunch and making a small amount of food go a whole lot farther. Some folks dressed it up with shredded cheese or onions if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find this recipe clipped from old magazines, scribbled in community cookbooks, or passed along by word of mouth from one busy family to the next. It was never about being fancy. It was about keeping everyone full with what little you had. Today, it is one of those forgotten meals. But for plenty of homes back then, canned chili over saltines made dinner happen fast. Grilled cheese with tomato soup remained the dependable duo that countless families turned to when they needed quick warmth and comfort. Thick slices of bread buttered to the edges crisped in a skillet, while slices of sharp cheddar melted between them, forming a gooey center and a golden crust. At the same time, a pot of tomato soup, whether homemade or from a can, warmed gently on the stove, its sweet aroma filling the kitchen. The sandwich was sliced diagonally for easy dipping, the molten cheese stretching slightly with each pull. Together, they made a meal greater than the sum of its parts, delivering rich flavor and childhood nostalgia in every bite. Perfect for cold evenings or busy nights, this pairing came together in under 10 minutes and required only the simplest ingredients. Families appreciated how it pleased every age and left little to clean up. Buttered toast with jelly and cottage cheese was the breakfast that nobody expected to work, and somehow it always did. Toasted white bread, slathered with fruit jelly, topped with a small scoop of cottage cheese, sweet, tangy, creamy, and warm all at once. In the 1950s, this was one of those modern health breakfasts you might see in a women's magazine or a home economics guide. Cottage cheese was having its moment, promoted for its protein, its lightness, and its versatility. Pairing it with toast and jelly gave it a little glamour without losing its practicality. Housewives liked that it felt trendy but still used everyday ingredients. Kids liked that it was colorful and mild, something that did not require chewing too much or sitting too long. It became especially popular with homemakers who were watching their weight or trying to follow the latest health advice without sacrificing flavor. For families on tight budgets, it offered nutrition and novelty in a single bite. No pans to scrub, no leftovers to deal with, and nothing wasted. It might not have made the neighbors jealous, but it got you through the morning with your head held high. That counts for a lot. Quick-fried bananas were a sweet indulgence that required no more than a hot pan and a pat of butter. You sliced ripe bananas down the middle or into coins, then laid them in a skillet with butter and a dusting of sugar. A few minutes on each side, and the bananas would soften and caramelize, forming a golden crust that smelled like candy and felt like breakfast. Some folks added cinnamon, others a splash of lemon juice. If you had cream or yogurt, you could serve them on top, but even on their own, they were a treat. Bananas were more affordable than most fruits in the 1920s thanks to expanding trade, and people were always looking for new ways to use them. Fried bananas were quick, warm, and a clever way to salvage fruit that was just a day too ripe for eating raw. They showed up at breakfast tables, dessert trays, and sometimes tucked between slices of bread for a fast, sticky sandwich. It was not fancy, but it was fast. And when food had to stretch, quick treats like this reminded you that the kitchen could still be a happy place. Meatball sub with jarred sauce turned a simple grocery shortcut into a filling dinner that satisfied every craving for Italian flavor without a long simmer. Pre-made meatballs went straight from the freezer into a skillet of bubbling jarred marinara, their aroma mingling with garlic and herbs as they heated through. Crusty sandwich rolls toasted under the broiler until the edges crisped and the centers stayed soft. As soon as the meatballs were hot and coated in rich sauce, they were spooned into the warm rolls and showered with shredded mozzarella that melted instantly. The result was a hearty sandwich with tender meat, tangy tomato, and gooey cheese in every bite, ready in less time than it took to set the table. Families loved how it felt like a deli treat even on a rushed weeknight, while kids enjoyed the messy fun of eating it with both hands. Each sub tasted slow-cooked and special, proof that smart shortcuts can create a dinner worth gathering around, bringing warmth and satisfaction to the end of a long day without draining time, energy, or budget. One pan, one jar, and a handful of rolls delivered comfort that lingered well past the last bite. Cold canned salmon salad was one of those quick, thrifty meals that turned an inexpensive pantry staple into a fast, protein-packed plate when groceries were running low. You flaked canned salmon into a bowl, stirred in mayonnaise, and chopped celery if you had it, and served it up cold. That was all there was to it. Fast, simple, and surprisingly satisfying when families needed something filling in a hurry. It might not sound exciting now, but back then, this recipe showed up in lunchboxes, on picnic tables, or tucked onto a dinner plate when meat was scarce and time was tight. The salmon added protein, the mayo brought it all together, and the celery gave it crunch if you were lucky enough to have some in the fridge. Families leaned on meals like this to stretch their groceries and keep everyone full without much effort. You would find cold canned salmon salad scribbled onto old recipe cards, passed down by neighbors, or quietly tucked into grandma's collection of forgotten quick meals. It might be overlooked now, but back then this was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight. cinnamon sugar butter toast was the kind of simple comfort food that could brighten up an afternoon in under 10 minutes, especially when there was not much else to work with. You toasted up some bread, slathered it with butter, sprinkled on cinnamon and sugar, and called it a snack. That was it. Quick, sweet, and surprisingly satisfying when groceries were scarce and everyone needed a little pick-me-up. It sounds simple, but back then, families leaned on recipes like this to stretch ingredients and turn basic pantry staples into something that felt like a treat. The butter gave it richness, the cinnamon sugar added sweetness, and the toast made it crunchy enough to feel special. You would find this little recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down through generations as a fast, affordable way to keep kids happy and tummies full. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of homes back then, cinnamon sugar butter toast was the perfect fix for long afternoons and short grocery lists. Leftover spaghetti sandwiches were the oddball lunch that quietly stuck around in frugal kitchens long after most people thought they had disappeared. You grabbed cold spaghetti, sauce and all, layered it between slices of white bread, and toasted the whole thing in a skillet until golden and crisp. It sounds strange now, but back then, this was a smart way to stretch last night's dinner into something new without spending another dime. Families with growing kids loved this one because it was hearty, fast, and filled everyone up on the cheap. The bread got crispy, the spaghetti heated through, and suddenly leftovers did not seem so boring. Some folks added shredded cheese, extra sauce, or even a little garlic butter if they wanted to dress it up, but most kept it plain. You could find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, passed along at community potlucks, or tucked inside faded cookbooks under fast lunches or leftover meals. It was quirky, salty, and filling, which is probably why people kept making it even when their cupboards were nearly empty. Orange juice French toast was the breakfast curveball that actually hit the sweet spot. Back in the 1970s, when cereal boxes came with recipes and orange juice was the breakfast king, someone decided to swap the usual milk and cinnamon for a splash of pure citrus sunshine. The result? A tangy, zesty twist on French toast that somehow tasted like summer mornings in California. You made it the same way as the original. Beat a few eggs, soak your slices of bread, and pan-fry them in butter. But instead of milk, you used orange juice, maybe with a pinch of sugar or nutmeg. The toast cooked up golden and crisp, with just enough of that citrus edge to feel like something special. It was the kind of thing you made when you ran out of milk and then kept making because it just worked. But if orange juice French toast surprised you, wait until you hear about the sandwich that combined peanut butter, crispy bacon, and pure roadside diner joy. Velveeta Grits Swirl was the fast food breakfast of choice long before drive-thrus and donut chains ruled the morning. If you grew up in the American South in the 1970s, chances are this dish was on your plate at least once a week, maybe more. It started with a bubbling pot of grits, the kind that cooked up in 5 minutes flat and stuck to your ribs like good intentions. Into that creamy base went a generous chunk of Velveeta cheese, stirred until it melted into a golden swirl of smooth, salty comfort. Some folks added a dash of black pepper or a spoonful of margarine. It was rich, filling, and easy to make in big batches, which is exactly why it became a favorite at church breakfasts, diner counters, and crowded family tables. It disappeared slowly as instant breakfast took over, but one spoonful will remind you why it held on so long. Still, not every old-school breakfast had to be savory. Some were as wiggly and sweet as a dance floor on prom night. Shrimp and grits. Quick Bowl delivered coastal comfort with pantry convenience, turning pre-cooked shrimp and instant grits into a 10-minute feast. Water boiled while butter melted in a skillet, where garlic and a pinch of paprika released a smoky aroma. The shrimp, already cooked and cleaned, were tossed in the sizzling butter until warmed through and lightly seasoned with lemon juice. Instant grits whisked in another pot thickened in minutes, creamy and soft with a touch of salt. The hot grits were spooned into bowls and topped with the buttery shrimp and their flavorful drippings. A sprinkle of chopped green onions or parsley added a fresh finish. Despite the short cooking time, the dish tasted like a slow weekend brunch by the shore. Families loved how it brought a touch of luxury to a busy weeknight. proving that quick meals could still feel special and deeply satisfying when simple ingredients were treated with care and attention. Egg custard cups were the little breakfast miracle that came out of ration books and post-war sensibility. Eggs and milk were precious, but when you used them right, you could stretch them into something soft, sweet, and filling all at once. You would whisk up a simple mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, and a pinch of nutmeg, pour it into little ceramic cups, and bake them gently until just set. No fancy tools, no need for a crust or garnish, just warmth in a cup. For kids, it was almost like dessert for breakfast. For adults, it was protein-packed fuel wrapped in comfort. Some homemakers added breadcrumbs or raisins, others kept it plain and pure, but the heart of the recipe was always the same. It was dignified, cozy, and just a little bit special. You did not need maple syrup or powdered sugar. The texture alone, smooth, light, almost wobbly, was enough to keep you coming back. If you ever find a cracked old recipe card with baked egg custard scribbled in fading blue ink, that is a treasure worth holding on to. Pickled tongue on crackers may not sound like 10-minute food, but hear me out. The tongue itself was pickled ahead of time, sliced deli thin and kept chilled, usually in brine or vinegar. When it came time to eat, all you had to do was lay a few slices on buttered crackers or small toast rounds. That was it. No cooking, no fuss. Just a quick savory bite, served cold, with a flavor that leaned into sharp and salty. Beef tongue was not always considered awful in the 1920s. It was just another cut of meat. It showed up in sandwiches, soups, and yes, on crackers. Pickling it preserved the meat for longer periods and made it shelf-stable in homes that lacked strong refrigeration. It was often sliced so thin you could see the light through it, and that made a little go a long way. When paired with a dab of mustard or horseradish, it became a bite that was as bold as it was fast. Not everyone loved it, but the people who did swore by it. In a world where nothing could go to waste, even a tongue could become a delicacy, served in less than 10 minutes. Pimento cheese on saltines was a southern staple that turned a few pantry ingredients into a quick, satisfying snack when groceries were running thin. You mixed up pimento cheese, usually some shredded cheddar, mayonnaise, chopped pimentos, and spread it over saltine crackers. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had something creamy, salty, and packed with flavor to hold you over until dinner. It might sound simple now, but back then, this little recipe kept homes running when budgets were stretched and time was short. The saltines gave it crunch, the pimento cheese added richness, and together they made a snack that showed up at school lunches, church picnics, or as a quick fix on busy afternoons. You would find this recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked in faded cookbooks, or passed down through generations of families who knew how to make the most of what they had. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of folks back then, pimento cheese on saltines was a fast, filling favorite that saved the day more than once. Quick crab imperial toasts were 10-minute luxury, proof that elegance could live in a can and still taste like celebration. Crab meat, fresh if you were lucky, tinned if you were practical, was mixed with cream, butter, egg yolk, paprika, and a splash of lemon juice before being spread thick over slices of soft white bread. Slipped under the broiler, it puffed and browned in moments, the surface bubbling like molten gold. The Joy of Cooking called it graceful economy, a phrase that captured the art of making something fine from nearly nothing. The scent of toasting crab and butter filled the kitchen with quiet richness, the kind that made guests think you had planned for days. Served on china plates or even paper napkins, it carried the same warmth, crisp at the edges, soft beneath, and deeply satisfying. For hosts with more pride than time, it was a miracle of speed and taste. Quick crab imperial toasts turned humble ingredients into hospitality itself, a fleeting bit of decadence made to last in memory. Milk toast was a warm hug in a bowl. If you grew up in a modest household during the 1920s, there is a good chance this was your breakfast, or your supper, at least once a week. You started by lightly toasting plain white bread, laying the slices in a shallow dish, and then pouring scalded milk over the top until it's soaked through. A pat of butter on top, maybe a sprinkle of cinnamon or sugar if you were lucky, and that was it. Just like that, you had a soft, custardy dish that soothed upset stomachs, filled empty bellies, and made the best use of simple ingredients. This was not food meant to impress. It was food that made do, quiet, gentle, and easy to love if you grew up with it. Many families relied on milk toast during illness or hard times. Doctors even recommended it for patients recovering from fevers or stomach bugs, calling it light but sustaining. What today might sound like soggy toast was once a go-to comfort meal. And if you were a child waking up to a cold kitchen and an even colder world outside, a bowl of warm milk toast felt like safety itself. Scrambled eggs with American cheese were diner food brought home in the very best way. Back then, American cheese was not something to apologize for. It was creamy, melty, and made scrambled eggs taste like a dream. Housewives knew how to cook them low and slow, folding in squares of cheese just before the eggs finished setting. The result was a soft, velvety pile of yellow goodness that clung to your fork like it had something to prove. No herbs, no vegetables, no toppings, just eggs and cheese, plain and perfect. Served with toast or sometimes a sausage link on the side, it was the kind of breakfast you could throw together in 10 minutes and still feel proud of. It fed tired dads, fussy kids, and the occasional neighbor who dropped by unannounced. It was a meal that did not need to be complicated to be good. In fact, that was kind of the point. Scrambled eggs with American cheese reminded everyone that simple food could still feel like a small reward. Quick bologna slaw sandwiches were the shortcut lunch that turned cheap deli meat and leftover dressing into something filling in almost no time. You chopped up slices of bologna, mixed them with coleslaw dressing, usually that creamy, tangy kind, and spooned the whole mixture onto soft sandwich buns. That was lunch, ready in under 10 minutes and surprisingly satisfying. This quirky little meal showed up all over Southern quick lunch cookbooks and school cafeteria menus because it was fast, affordable, and made the most of what you had on hand. Bologna was the lunch meat that never seemed to run out, and coleslaw dressing lived in the fridge way longer than you expected. Some folks added shredded cabbage or onions to stretch it further, but most kept it simple with just bologna, creamy dressing, and a soft bun. It might not sound gourmet, but when the clock was ticking and grocery money was tight, these salty, creamy sandwiches were a lifesaver. You would find the recipe scribbled on old index cards, passed around at potlucks, or tucked inside faded community cookbooks that promised quick meals when time and energy were both running low. Cornflake-crusted fried bologna was one of those quick, crispy fixes that turned a plain slice of bologna into a satisfying meal in no time flat. You dredged a slice of bologna in crushed cornflakes, tossed it in a hot skillet, and fried it until the edges curled and the coating crisped up. That was it. No fancy ingredients, no complicated steps, just a fast, crunchy meal made from pantry staples. It might sound odd now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries had to stretch, this was a clever way to turn everyday bologna into something that felt a little more special. The cornflakes added crunch, the bologna sizzled up with salty flavor, and the whole thing came together in under 10 minutes. You would find this recipe scribbled into old cookbooks, passed around busy households, or whispered between neighbors looking for quick, affordable meal ideas. It might seem forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, cornflake-crusted fried bologna was a fast, filling fix when time and money were both running short. Mock crab salad was a dish that smiled through hard times, a clever illusion born from creativity. The joy of cooking included it as a quick fish substitute, though no crab ever swam near it. Chopped eggs, celery, and a bit of onion were folded into mayonnaise seasoned with paprika and vinegar. The flavor, surprisingly, came close, fresh, tangy, and satisfying on crackers or bread. It was a dish made by those who knew how to stretch the truth and a dollar at the same time. Served chilled in lettuce cups or on toast, it was both playful and practical. Housewives praised it for taste and speed. Children loved it because they believed the name. It was the taste of make-do magic, proving once again that imitation could be its own kind of art. Grapefruit broiled with brown sugar was the 1950s version of classy. There was something about taking a humble fruit, adding a spoonful of brown sugar, and sliding it under the broiler that just made it feel elevated. This was not about sweetness. It was about ritual. Housewives would slice a grapefruit in half, loosen the segments with a serrated knife, sprinkle on the sugar, and broil it just long enough to caramelize the top. The result was part breakfast, part showpiece. You would serve it warm, on a proper saucer, maybe with a sprig of mint if you were feeling fancy. It showed up at brunches, bridal showers, or special breakfasts when the in-laws were in town. For kids, it was a little sour, a little sweet, and a lot of spectacle. For adults, it felt like something from a hotel menu, without ever leaving the house. Grapefruit might not be the go-to fruit today, but in the 1950s, it was breakfast with a wink and a little flame. Egg lemon soup, or avgolemono, was fast, filling, and smooth. Greek immigrants brought the recipe with them, and it quickly spread to American kitchens. You just needed broth, a beaten egg, lemon juice, and something starchy like rice or orzo. The trick was slowly stirring in the egg so the heat thickened the soup without scrambling it. The result was creamy without cream, brightened by lemon, and warm enough to soothe anything. Greek-American families swore by it. By the 1920s, it showed up in cookbooks as lemon egg soup or quick Greek broth. Light but hearty, it matched the era's need for meals that felt comforting but cost little. If the broth was hot and the egg ready, you could have it on the table in 10 minutes. It was quiet, soft, and somehow still bold. Cornmeal griddle cakes were one of those no-fuss breakfasts that got the job done with nothing but grit, literally. In the post-war years, cornmeal was everywhere. It was affordable, dependable, and endlessly adaptable. Housewives used it as a stand-in for flour when money was tight, and these griddle cakes were one of the best ways to make a warm, filling breakfast without using up all your eggs or milk. Just a little cornmeal, water or milk, maybe an egg if you had one to spare, and you had a skillet-ready batter in minutes. The texture was slightly crisp around the edges, with a hearty middle that soaked up butter or syrup like it was born to. You might get applesauce on the side if it was fruit season, or just a smear of jam if sugar rations had eased up. Cornmeal griddle cakes reminded folks of simpler times, back when breakfast was cooked by hand and served with love, even if it came from a pan that was older than you were. It might not have looked like much, but it kept people full and it tasted like home. Sometimes that was more than enough. Cabbage and hot dog stir-fry was the skillet lunch that popped up in every budget cookbook from the 1970s, and it stuck around because it worked. You chopped cabbage, sliced up hot dogs, threw them in a hot pan with a little oil, and stir-fried the whole thing until crispy and tender. It was salty, smoky, crunchy, and came together in under 10 minutes. This recipe lived in frugal households, school cafeterias, and quick lunch guides because it used the cheapest ingredients possible and still filled you up. Cabbage was a go-to vegetable for stretching meals, and hot dogs were always around because they lasted forever in the fridge. Toss them together, add a little pepper or hot sauce, and lunch was ready fast. Some folks added onions or garlic, but most kept it simple, just cabbage and hot dogs sizzling in the pan. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, warm, and made sure nothing went to waste when groceries were tight. Egg nests were breakfast theater in 10 minutes flat. Egg whites were whipped into glossy clouds, shaped into little nests, and baked just long enough to firm before the yolks were added back in. The result was a dish that looked far fancier than it was, light, airy, and golden at the center. The Joy of Cooking described it as a dainty breakfast, perfect for brunches or special mornings. Housewives loved it because it turned a single egg into something spectacular. The contrast between the soft yolk and crisp-edged white made every bite feel delicate. Served with buttered toast or a slice of ham, it looked like something straight from a hotel breakfast tray. Children watched in awe as the nests puffed up in the oven. It was fast, pretty, and impossibly charming, the kind of forgotten magic that made morning feel like an occasion. Creamed mushrooms on toast was what passed for luxury in the modest kitchens of the 1950s. Not luxury in the fine dining sense, but in the way that creamy, savory warmth could feel a little bit like being pampered, even if you were still in your housecoat and slippers. Mushrooms, especially canned or foraged ones, were cheap and shelf-stable, and a quick bechamel-style sauce made from milk, butter, and flour turned them into something decadent. You would slice up white bread, toast it until golden, and ladle the creamy mushrooms right on top. Maybe you would throw in some onion or parsley if the garden had any left, or stir in a splash of broth to deepen the flavor. It was earthy, filling, and soft around the edges. Breakfast that did not demand a lot, but gave a whole lot back. It was served to guests, to husbands home from night shifts, or to little kids who needed something nourishing before school. It was simple, humble, and completely satisfying. Brunch today might have the bells and whistles, but back then, this dish was elegance on a dime. Ginger ale salad was a dazzling surprise on any table. Made from powdered gelatin, canned fruit, and sweet, fizzy ginger ale, it wobbled with pride from the center of countless luncheons and family dinners. You dissolved the gelatin in hot water, stirred in ginger ale, and drained canned pineapple, and poured the mixture into molds. In less than 10 minutes of prep, you had something colorful, sweet, and full of sparkle. The ginger ale gave it a mild bite, and the fruit added texture. Once set, it was sliced or scooped, often served on lettuce leaves with a spoonful of cottage cheese. Housewives in the 1920s loved this dish because it was elegant without being complicated. Ginger ale was still something of a treat, and when paired with fruit and gelatin, it became more than just a beverage. It became dessert, or salad, or both, depending on who you asked. It was a novelty that felt a bit modern, a bit clever, and always worth repeating. The bubbles made it feel festive, and the colors made it cheerful. It may not have lasted through the decades, but it once lit up tables everywhere. Baked apple cinnamon oatmeal was the kind of breakfast that could stop you in your tracks the moment you stepped into the kitchen. One whiff of baked apples, cinnamon, and warm oats, and you knew someone cared enough to make something real. In the 1950s, it was not just about feeding people. It was about comforting them. Oatmeal was cheap, apples were common, and cinnamon? Well, that was a pantry staple in almost every American home. Housewives leaned into baked breakfasts like this because you could prepare it the night before, pop it in the oven, and serve it piping hot in the morning without the chaos. Some versions used brown sugar or molasses, others added raisins or walnuts, but the bones of the recipe stayed the same. It was hearty enough for Dad before his shift, sweet enough for the kids, and easy enough to stretch for a family of 5. Most importantly, it filled the house with that soft smell of warmth and safety, something a cold cereal just could not pull off. It made breakfast feel a little more like Sunday, even on a Monday. A small, fragrant ritual that made the whole house feel stitched together by cinnamon and care. Leftover meatloaf sandwiches with ketchup were the reliable lunches that showed up in fridges across America the day after dinner. You sliced cold meatloaf thin, layered it onto soft sandwich bread, added a squirt of ketchup, and called it done. It was fast, filling, and made sure that last night's dinner stretched just a little further. Meatloaf itself was all about using affordable ingredients, ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, and stretching them into a meal for the whole family. Turning leftovers into sandwiches was the next logical step, and it worked. You got a hearty, savory lunch ready in under 10 minutes with barely any effort. Old cookbooks loved suggesting it. Lunchboxes were packed with it, and kids grew up knowing exactly what was coming after meatloaf night. You could add cheese or lettuce if you had them, but most families kept it plain with just meatloaf and ketchup. It might not sound glamorous now, but back then it was the fast, frugal lunch that kept families fed and made every bit of dinner count. During the 1920s, canned tomatoes were affordable and widely available, even in rural towns. Bread was a constant in most homes, and this recipe gave stale slices new life. Some families added herbs or garlic for flavor, but even plain, it was deeply satisfying. It was often served as a quick lunch or light dinner on cold days. No frills, no waste. Just a hot meal from 2 cans and a skillet, with enough flavor to make you forget how simple it really was. Eggnog without alcohol was a quick way to make something feel like a celebration, even when there was not much to celebrate. You cracked a fresh egg into a bowl, beat it with milk, sugar, and a dash of nutmeg, then served it cold in a glass with maybe a sprinkle of cinnamon on top. No booze, no fuss. Just a rich, frothy drink that tasted like the holidays even in the middle of July. It was sweet, thick, and surprisingly filling, used as both a treat and a light meal. In the 1920s, fresh eggs and milk were still staples in most homes, especially in rural areas. Sugar was more precious but used sparingly here, making this drink both indulgent and economical. Kids loved it. Adults appreciated the comfort it brought without needing anything off the shelf. It could be whipped up in under 5 minutes, no heat required. And whether it was sipped slowly or gulped down, it left you feeling full, cozy, and cared for. Sometimes, a cold glass of eggnog was just the thing to remind you the world still had a little sweetness left. Cold rice with milk and sugar was the breakfast that proved leftovers could be magic. Last night's rice, usually white and a little dry, was revived in the morning with a pour of cold milk and a spoonful of sugar stirred together into something soft and soothing. In homes where waste was not an option, this dish was a small victory. Some mornings you had fruit, maybe a few raisins or chopped dates. Other times it was just plain rice, gently sweetened and chilled like a soft cereal. Some folks added a dash of cinnamon or nutmeg, others kept it simple and let the rice speak for itself. It was especially popular in summertime, when hot food felt like too much and cold breakfasts were easier to handle. No one bragged about it, and you would not find it in cookbooks, but it stayed in rotation because it worked. You did not serve it to guests. You did not need a recipe. It was just one of those dishes that showed up when the cupboard was bare and still managed to feel complete. That kind of quiet utility made it a breakfast worth remembering. Creamed corn and egg skillet was one of those weirdly satisfying lunches that showed up when the fridge was nearly empty and time was running short. You would grab a can of creamed corn, crack in a few eggs, and fry everything together in one pan. It sounds questionable now, but for families back then, it was warm, savory, and fast. Ready in minutes when kids came home hungry or dad's lunch break was short. It usually got served with plain white toast or leftover biscuits, soaking up every last bit of that creamy, buttery mess. Some folks added black pepper or a sprinkle of shredded cheese, but most kept it plain because that is what was in the cupboard. It was not glamorous, and nobody was putting this on a restaurant menu, but in old cookbooks it was listed right next to the hearty quick meals section. That is how you knew it worked. Creamed sardines on toast were the working man's comfort food, no doubt about it. You took canned sardines, packed in oil or water, mashed them lightly, and stirred them into a quick white sauce of butter, flour, and milk. The sauce softened the strong flavor and made the fish feel richer than it actually was. Then you ladled the warm mixture over toast, maybe sprinkled on some pepper or parsley if you had it, and called it a meal. It was salty, creamy, and full of protein, exactly what families needed when meat was hard to come by. Sardines were cheap and nutritious, and they had the benefit of being shelf-stable in a time when fresh fish was a luxury for coastal towns only. Rural families stocked up on them, and this was one of the fastest ways to turn a humble can into something hearty. If you were lucky, you would get a slice of tomato or onion on the side. But even without extras, creamed sardines hit the spot, and they were on the table in under 10 minutes, which made them one of the most dependable dishes of the time. Cracker Stack lunches were the shortcut every lunchbox kid quietly loved, and every parent threw together when time was short. You took Ritz crackers, layered slices of American cheese between them, and tossed in some apple slices on the side. It was simple, salty, and filled you up without needing to cook a thing. Old lunchbox guides always had this one listed because it hit that sweet spot between easy, affordable, and kid-friendly. Some folks swapped in peanut butter or ham, but the classic cheese and cracker combo stuck around the longest. It was not gourmet, but it got the job done. Quick, portable, and ready before the bus pulled up. It sounds basic now, but for families juggling busy mornings and tight grocery budgets, Cracker stacks were a reliable lunch that needed zero effort to pull off. Cold potato and pickle salad was everything the name promised. Cheap, fast, and just sharp enough to wake you up. Chopped boiled potatoes, often left over from the night before, were tossed with diced pickles and sometimes onions in a mustard-based dressing. There was no mayo in most versions, though families who could afford it might add a little for creaminess. This dish came together fast and was served cold, making it perfect for summer meals, picnics, or quick lunches. The pickles added salt and crunch, the potatoes added bulk, and the dressing brought the whole thing to life. It was a no-cook wonder, ideal for busy families or days when the stove just could not be used. Some homemakers even kept a bowl of this on hand in the icebox, ready to scoop and serve with bread or cold meat. It was not glamorous, but it was reliable, and it filled out a plate without breaking the budget. That was the thing about 1920s cooking. You did not need much, just a little know-how and a good eye for leftovers. Applesauce donuts were soft little miracles that tasted like autumn and love and maybe just a little bit of nostalgia. Housewives back then were no strangers to baking in bulk, and applesauce, especially the homemade kind, was a clever way to stretch eggs, oil, and sugar in a batter. You would mix it with flour, spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, maybe a touch of clove, then fry or bake the donuts until golden and pillowy. The result was a breakfast treat that walked the line between cake and bread, sweet but not too sweet. You could roll them in sugar or just eat them warm and plain, soft on the inside and slightly crisp around the edges. These donuts were often made in big batches, stored in tins, and handed out to family, neighbors, or anyone passing through. In some homes, they were Saturday breakfast. In others, they were school lunch add-ons. Either way, they always disappeared fast. Applesauce donuts proved that you could make something comforting and shareable out of whatever you had sitting on your shelf. Eggs a la goldenrod was one of those quietly elegant dishes that proved how far a single egg could go. Hard-boiled eggs were chopped into a creamy white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, seasoned just enough to feel comforting without being heavy. The golden yolks were pressed through a sieve and sprinkled on top like sunshine. It was ladled generously over buttered toast, warm and simple, but it felt refined enough to serve guests. Housewives swore by it for its thrift and speed, 10 minutes from pan to plate. The recipe appeared in early editions of The Joy of Cooking as a way to turn breakfast into something special without fuss or waste. It was food for busy mornings, for children before school, or for quiet dinners when money was tight. Even with such basic ingredients, it had an air of ceremony, a touch of care. The smell of warm milk and butter filled the kitchen like a soft promise. It was a reminder that nourishment could be beautiful when made with love and patience. Some families swapped the raisins for nuts, dried cranberries, or chocolate chips when they wanted to shake things up, but the basic version stuck around for decades. You would find this recipe tucked into picnic cookbooks, school lunch guides, and old magazines promising fun, budget-friendly meals made with whatever happened to be in the fridge. It was not flashy, but it made celery a little less boring, and for families watching their grocery bills, that was good enough. Paired with soup or cucumber sandwiches, it brightened the plate with both color and texture, offering relief from heavier courses. Each bite delivered the taste of care disguised as simplicity. It was food that whispered, rather than shouted, speaking of good taste without effort. Though it faded from modern menus, buttered radishes on rye remain a reminder that elegance lives in the small, deliberate choices, a thin slice, a smooth spread, and a moment taken to savor. The best recipes were never complicated. They were simply right. Potted cheese spread was what you made when the cheese drawer looked empty. You took whatever bits you had left, cheddar, Swiss, or even something soft, and mashed them up with butter until smooth. Then you added seasonings, mustard, paprika, maybe a little onion if you were bold. The result was a creamy, tangy spread you could use on crackers, toast, or sandwiches. It took 5 minutes to mix and even less to appreciate. This was poor man's pâté, and it was surprisingly common in 1920s households that valued resourcefulness. You might see it in tea rooms, served alongside olives and celery sticks, or in lunchboxes, spread between slices of dark rye. Nothing went to waste, especially not cheese, which cost too much to throw out. This dish could be made in big batches and kept chilled for several days. It was humble, yes, but it had flavor. And most importantly, it stretched a little cheese into something that felt like much more. That was the whole point of potted cheese, to remind you that smart cooking could be just as satisfying as rich cooking. Tang pie cups were the wild little treat you never knew you needed. Picture this: whipped topping, condensed milk, and a few spoonfuls of Tang orange drink mix blended into a citrusy, sweet mousse, then spooned into graham cracker crusts or little jelly jars. It was a dessert that looked fancy but cost nearly nothing, and it rode the coattails of America's obsession with all things space age. Tang had taken over breakfast tables thanks to the astronauts, and homemakers wasted no time figuring out how to turn it into a treat. These pie cups became a weeknight sensation, showing up at potlucks, lunchboxes, and after-school kitchen counters. They chilled fast, set firm, and could be made in bulk. It was retro dessert science, and it worked. But if you thought dessert with a powdered drink was impressive, let us take a sharp turn into something far more savory and just as strangely satisfying. Which quick recipe from the past would you try in your kitchen tonight? Share your favorites in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so we can keep dusting off these forgotten cookbook treasures.